I want to welcome everyone today to this is our fall semester super jury, which we had planned to have at the end of the semester, and traditionally we hold it at the end of the semester. This year, we're holding it at the beginning of the spring semester. This is because we couldn't get our act together last semester, but it's also a test as to whether it's better to start the semester off with work as opposed to ending it with work when everyone is exhausted. This way, it's a fresh start. And so this afternoon, students will be cycling through a gallery that is basically in front of me, behind you. You can't see it, but trust me, all of the work is pinned up on the wall in a space here, and there are students. So this is going to be a bit of a free-for-all. So I want to welcome our guests. And with sad news, I have to say that Kelly Hutzel, who is our former director of the school, her father-in-law passed away yesterday. And she could not make it for religious reasons. She's being buried today, and we, as a school, are deeply saddened by this and offer our condolences. She tried mightily to get a proxy to come in at the last minute, but she could not. So it's up to you guys, the two of you, to hold the afternoon. Let me just introduce our guests. Today we have Julie Kim joining us from the Georgia Institute of Technology, aka Georgia Tech. Julie is a tenured associate professor in the School of Architecture at Georgia Tech and founder and principal of C2 Architecture Studio, an award-winning woman-owned architectural practice. At Georgia Tech, she is the director and founder of the award-winning Flourishing Communities Collaborative, an academic research lab that demonstrates the value of a computational, quantitative, and data-driven approach to solving social and cultural problems for those communities who are traditionally under-resourced and underserved by the design disciplines. So welcome, Julie. It's a great bio. And Brian Holland, who is an old friend of NJIT's, a former instructor here, is an architect, researcher, and educator, and the co-founder of OpenSet, a design and research studio working at the intersection of architecture, urbanism, and ecology. He is an assistant professor of architecture at the University of Arkansas's Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design, where he coordinates third-year design studios and the public lecture series. Holland is the creator and organizer of the Piggybacking Practices Research Project, which launched online in 2021 and will be exhibited in Venice, Italy in 2023. So we want to welcome Brian back to NJIT, who can bring us both fresh and seasoned criticism. So a little bit about the format of the afternoon. Again, we are looking at advanced studio work at the undergraduate and graduate level. What that means is fourth and fifth year studios in the undergraduate level, and then the advanced studio at the graduate level. And I don't think we're going to have the MIP studios, the urban design studios, with us today, so we'll be able to adjourn a little bit early. We do this typically in the spring semester, in the fall semester. In the spring semester, we look at the architectural core. And this is a time for us to really be able to kind of look at all the work across the studios, but also in a transparent way that all the students can see it. We're seeing the best work. These are all the single most selected project of each of the studio faculty of that year. So it's offering the best that we have. But this also serves a very important archival role for us because the videos are going to be part of our accreditation visit, which will be in late April. We're going to post these videos beforehand so the visiting team can get a sense of the work that we are showing, that they're going to be seeing in a kind of a collective context across the board. So the way the format works is that we have pre-recorded MP4 presentations that are nominally about 5 minutes, and we've set aside 20 minutes for each studio section. So I've left it to some of the instructors as to how we're going to post that. We have one presentation that may be narrated from Germany by a student who's no longer here with us and couldn't get his audio to work, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it to see how that works. So with that said, Julie and Brian, do you have any questions? You guys are good to go? Okay, so again, we're going to start with free option studios. Then we're going to take a break at about 1:20, and then we're going to go through the undergraduate advanced studio. So Steve Zdepski will make a short introduction, but we'll look at 6 projects of the same site in Prague. And then we will look at the graduate work, which the graduate advanced studios also use the same site. And then we'll adjourn after that. Maybe we'll just go right through it and we won't have a break. And then at the end, we'll open it up to a larger conversation. So I'm speaking from a podium in WebEx. Once you see the presentations, those students will come up here and they'll be able to respond to any comments. And then if faculty or students want to make comments from the floor to take up some of that 20 minutes, we can entertain that as well. So we can work this as a bit of a dialogue. All right, with that said, students, you want to come up and meet our critics?
So my name's Mary, and our studio is called Ubiquitous Spaces, and we combined advanced building technology and resiliency knowledge with topics associated with smart technology, such as sensors, computing, virtual augmented reality, and we considered various aspects and scales of these smart technologies and then tried to incorporate them with some kind of architectural design. Yes.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Sebastian.
And I'm Joe.
This is Sejo. The goal for this project is to create a system that adapts to individual users. With home adaptability becoming popular, taking this technology to a working environment becomes easier as well. These are a few case studies indicating research that we did to understand comfort and relation to productivity. They're designed and intended for all walks of life. These are 3 scenarios which each user has a specific attribute to create unique, customized environments.
We use a variety of parts from microcontrollers to sensors to set up the system. The product layout for the cloud contained user info. User info is then read via an RFID sensor. The RFID loads the profile and updates the surroundings. This is a container for the hub where we scan the RFID.
With our first set of technology, we focused on a chair, being one of the essential components used in everyday work environments.
The chair runs on 12-volt power and reads body temperature and pressure to control the fans and table height. This is a housing for the chair.
Next, we focus on another major asset to a workstation, your desk, where the majority of the productivity is achieved, mainly targeting adjustability to people of all shapes and sizes. These are a few design variations testing torsion and leverage for the most stable movement from when actuators were activated.
The table design uses 2 actuators and 4 hydraulics and custom brackets to achieve movement. We created the brackets with a water jet, welding, and turning. Here's the housing for the controller.
Lastly, is a major driving force of work that is not always considered, which is lighting. Through the case studies mentioned before, work productivity is directly associated with supporting mental acuity, vitality, and alertness while reducing fatigue and daytime sleepiness.
We took a back door into the Phillips View Bridge and set signals of our own to coordinate our lighting.
This is an overall diagram showcasing the variety of users and the ability to adjust according to each specific profile throughout the working day.
In the future, Sejo is looking to add machine learning to it in order to future predict user movement.
Thank you.
Our project is augmented reality for emergency response. My name is Riccio, and I'm here with Shah. Our purpose of the project is to improve the efficiency of emergency responders by using augmented reality platforms to interface with the Internet of Things devices. Our key terms include wayfinding, augmented reality, and emergency response. Our design intent focuses on creating a system to respond to emergency fire incidents specifically. Our key audience includes emergency responders, building occupants, and the building owner. Example scenario A is for the emergency responder. This is where the fire department would be notified of a fire. They can access our website and view occupancy in each room as well as room temperatures, which will help them locate where the fire is. And so when they come to the scene, they can get egress paths to the fire and also see where building occupants still may be. The second scenario would be for the building occupants themselves, where the fire alarm would go off in the building. They could access the website, find their room location, and get it's the most efficient and safe egress path out of the building. And there would be a 3D element to show that path in order to better aid in exiting the building.
So I think that we need to put sensors to feed the data to the MySQL database, which then we pulled into our website that we made using CSS, PHP, HTML, and Java. Sensors read the data of the room and send it to the website, which displays information. Our sensors include PII sensors which detects motion and feeds occupancy data to the database. The thermostat feeds temperature readings to the database as well. Our breadboard includes the ESP Wi-Fi board, which connects to the display, thermostat, and PIR sensors. This is the encasement of the sensors, which can be hung on the walls or the ceiling.
The sensors were placed on the ceiling. Here's a video of our website. You'll see a 3D model in here. This makes it easier for a building occupant or emergency responder to read the floor plan. And then once we select what we're doing, a video will pop up showing the egress path out of the building from that room. And having that 3D video just speeds in easier and more efficient exit of the building. The next video shows how the sensors pick up the information, display it, and connect things with the database.
Our future developments include other disaster reliefs, independent power sources, and a real 3D augmented reality system. Thank you for watching, and here's the link to our website.
Okay.
Great. I wondered if you could, a question for the students, if you could say just a little bit more about the prompt of the studio in terms of how open it was for each of you. I mean, we saw two projects, and I'm curious, it seemed like two very different projects. Were those project ideas that you devised through a process in the studio, or were those given to you?
So we started by researching all different kinds of smart technologies. And so it started pretty broad. And after doing many literature reviews on each technology, we kind of narrowed it down within a group of 2 people and chose the specific technology we wanted to try and focus on. So other examples in our studio was smart cabinets and flooring, like smart facade, adaptive facade systems, and automated robotic trash cans. So they were all pretty different.
Yeah, I'm
Most
glad
of the
that Brian,
projects
go ahead.
relied around like the smart and adaptive technology. So like really user based, depending on like how like we can increase comfort in a building or increase efficiency in the buildings. That's pretty much what the studio was centered around.
Yeah, Brian, I'm glad you asked that question because I had a similar one when I was writing my notes down. I think that, the first project we saw was really about a scale related to the body and, individual kind of comfort, I'll say. And then the second project, which then kind of scales out and looks at kind of overall building infrastructure. And so some of the things that, and so that was really helpful to understand kind of the broad range of other kinds of solutions and proposals that students had pursued in your studio. I guess a question I would have is, that, when we look at the kind of integration of such, kind of technologies, smart technologies, and kind of embedding that into our kind of like our daily kind of surroundings. I find myself wondering, what your thoughts are about kind of the implementation of such strategies, across scales, across economic levels. Like for example, in the first example, we saw like a chair that can be, super responsive, to physical comfort, a desk that moves up and down. And I started wondering about, issues of access, bringing it to those who maybe aren't so fortunate to be able to have, the kind of access to such tools and technology, or, the scale of the second project, this idea that for emergency responders, that they're able to quickly find, those who are in the building, is that how does technology like that get implemented into I guess buildings that maybe are across scales of kind of, I guess, like economic status. I'd be curious to hear the students maybe talk a little bit about that kind of speculations of how these might be integrated.
So for ours, which is the fire system, we imagine that it would be implemented in the fire protocol already. So if there's any alarms or smoke detectors, this could potentially be adapted to what's already in the building and connected to the already existing system.
For our project, we were the Zehra system. The idea of being able to provide comfort and adaptability to a specific user seemed better and more efficient than the entirety of a building, kind of creating an autonomous, seamless action from beginning to end for the user itself, rather than having to focus on the entirety of a building. Joey?
Yeah. And then looking at sort of the economic value of this, of course, as new technology comes out, it's expensive, which is going to be one of the major driving issues in implementing this new technology. But one of the things, as it happens with market, once things start to get mass produced more, and these things become more regular in a day-to-day basis, we believe that the cost will go down over time, because that's how it is with all things. iPhone originally came out really expensive, as it was able to find a way of mass production, got normalized. All right, got normalized, and prices begin to drop, but then it really just depends on who's marketing it and who's selling at that point.
I think what was really quite amazing and inspiring about your presentations was the fact that you actually built prototypes. It wasn't simply a theoretical exercise, which we could imagine various scenarios and various technologies, but you actually tested them out. And I wonder, I mean, that's something that's so incredible, and I really appreciated seeing the videos of those being tested. I wonder if you could say a bit more about what that process was like for you. Did you have any experience previously with coding or building electronics? And, how many weeks of kind of trial and error was involved? Oh, and I'd be really curious to think about what was the feedback loop like in the process for you being trained as design students, right? Between the sort of design concepts that you developed, whether it be furniture design or a kind of spatial mapping of an environment, of a building, in relation to the tech itself, and then how the sort of challenges of the tech might have fed back into the design ideas.
So I know for our second project with the sensors, I had no experience in coding. I had like very minimal, took a class and knew the basics. But there's a lot of like resources out there on the internet that helped me. A lot of it was like I knew what I wanted, and if you searched it, they would like give back code to you. So that was kind of like the start of the design, but a lot of it was, especially in building the website, I would code something, see how it looked, especially from like a user experience standpoint, to see if like it's user friendly and easy to use. And it was a lot of definitely back and forth, editing code like every 5 minutes, seeing the process of like how the code processes, how the data is fed through the website. And then in terms of like as an architect, the best part was that we knew egress pretty well in the building. So we knew how to kind of incorporate fastest egresses in and out of the building for emergency responders, and we could like incorporate that into the website.
And then for our group, Sejo, which was the chair and desk and light, same thing about a class in coding. And then I'm lucky enough to have a bit of fabrication experience outside of school. So along with my partner's design ideas, we were able to begin fabricating prototypes and ideas for that.
The best part was the fact that our studio worked in groups, so it was more collaborative. So if you were weak on one end, if you were weaker on one end and the person was strong on the other, it helped balance out. So therefore, we were able to create such successful projects. So I think teamwork was probably one of the most effective tools.
And then to add on your point about kind of having to adjust, there were some things that we couldn't really figure out. Like for ours specifically, we did want to incorporate augmented reality, but we weren't really, with the time constraint and just our lack of experience, we kind of had to fake it a little bit and just do the video instead. So we kind of had to troubleshoot some things like that and find some different methods to get our point across, but work around our lack of knowledge on some of the technology.
Something else that I was thinking about during your presentations, which is really fascinating to ponder, I think, is so much of the app development space is centered around developing tools for our phones, right? That the phone itself is the portal to one individual human being, that there's a kind of one-to-one between a small device held in a hand and a person and all of the things that they need. But here are two examples of augmented tech that is not really mapped one-to-one in the same way. Yes, you scale them to be sort of manageable, sort of one desk, one person in one environment, or one building occupant seeking an exit, let's say. But what's so interesting to think about in relation to how these tools map onto architectural space is that those spaces are so often collective spaces. Spaces with multiple users, multiple needs, multiple kinds of comfort preferences. Let's say, in the case of an office, like how often would one person be working in one specific cubicle or a private office versus in an open office environment? And how would those sort of user preferences overlay or influence each other? And how could a kind of augmented system sort of calibrate for those adjacencies, right? Or in the case of trying to escape from a building during a disaster, right? Suddenly everyone is rushing simultaneously into collective spaces and kind of moving at speed. And emergency responders are sort of reading a mapping of a building and things are changing in real time. So what are the burdens on the tech? How do the architects and designers think about how these things overlay? So it's a really fascinating set of questions that you're posing. I think it's a great beginning for future research too.
So Julie, do you want to make a closing comment before we move to the next group?
I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about this project is that how spatial they both were. And I think, of course, as you know, on the one hand, one can say like, oh, these projects are really more about, UX, UI, and, alignment with architecture. But what I loved about what you all did is that you took you dove into kind of an investigation into smart technologies, and you applied it to conditions that are about the kind of human condition of occupying space, whether it's about, refining the kind of ability for first responders to get to a building and egress and making that clearer, or the idea of the chair, and then the kind of personal space of where one might work. So I really appreciated how you were able to kind of take that knowledge and apply it to conditions which are about kind of, human comfort and human safety and habitation. So interesting. I'd be curious to see what you all do next with the projects.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you to Ubiquitous Spaces. Andrzej Zarzycki was the instructor for that. So the next project is a design build project that was done in conjunction with the city of Newark last fall semester, and has an afterlife this semester. And there was a prequel before that. So I'm going to give you the critics for that to make some introductory comments. Charlie Firestone and Erin Pellegrino, and then we'll watch the video. So I give you Charlie and Erin.
Darius. Hello. Hello. Thanks for joining us. So as Darius mentioned, this is sort of at this point now become a three-part initiative in partnership with the City of Newark. Speak up. In partnership with the City of Newark, which has basically been looking at ways that the school can partner with the Mayor's Office of Homelessness Services to address providing more supportive housing. It started with temporary housing and has moved along a spectrum to more permanent. So what you're going to look at today is the second iteration of this studio, which looks at a much more permanent model to address this issue. This is actually going to move on now this semester into community meetings and the community engagement process. A lot of the students from this class are in a class that will look at that today, or look at that this semester alongside the homelessness czar in Newark.
So as Erin mentioned, this is kind of the second installment. The first part happened last year. So they designed and built a small prototypical unit. This semester was not a build semester. This was taking the research and work that had been done and continuing to work with the city and with the service providers and with the residents of the existing supportive housing community, so formerly homeless neighbors in Newark, to develop an updated housing model that's fully code compliant and a little bit more permanent, and also the supportive services and community around that model.
Yeah, and would want to just stress the highly collaborative nature of it. As Charlie mentioned, we had residents from other villages around the city come to speak to the students. The students provided or prepared questionnaires for them. We visited another village in the community and looked at ways to improve, and worked closely with the city, the general contractors. They did a somewhat robust pricing exercise just to make sure that this is a responsible project moving forward.
All right, we'll let them take it away.
If we do anything.
Hello everyone, my name is Kenya, and with my partners Liz and me, we will present our studio project called Resilient Hope. As a studio, we were asked to envision the third stage of a development project in the city of Newark that is creating villages of emergency housing for people without addresses. These are some of the deliverables for the project: a minimum of 220 square foot of livable space, 2 occupants was the desired amount of residents for each unit. And finally, we wanted to design in a way where our work can be used as a model for future villages. In our research and conversation with the city of Newark, we found that our demographic will mainly consist of individuals over the age of 50. Half of the residents may have a chronic health condition, and half of the residents may come as partners that might be traumatic to pull apart.
We were given 4 different sites to evaluate in terms of scale for 25 residents as well as for broader context. Our primary site, Site 4, is in Site 4 was given priority by the city. It's located on the border of East Orange and Newark in a residential neighborhood with a 30-minute bus ride to downtown. Our goals for the site design were influenced by meetings with Hope Village residents, social workers, and volunteers. Their security, dignity, community, and connectivity. These goals directly translate into 4 overall elements in the site design: the fence, the entry, the community buildings, and the aggregation. The fence was a key point of the design, both a required element by the city and a highly desired element by Hope Village residents. The fence design was to be non-scalable, and we designed it to incorporate a mural and have varying levels of ferocity and usability. In contrast to the fence at Hope Village 1, we broke down the scale of the street by stepping the fence and interrupting it with the entry building. The entry building was designed to celebrate the threshold of entry into the village and signify the dignity of coming home. The entry beyond the fence holds lockers for residents to leave any belongings that are not allowed in the village. We also included a community open-door pantry for village residents and community members to leave or take food. Here's a plan of the entry, which acts as a lobby, compared to the entry of Hope Village 1, which does all the security screening out of the building. This interior threshold makes the entry more dignified. Here's a view of that entry building with the security checkpoint in the front and the pantry beyond. Next is the community buildings, which you can see highlighted in green here. In the plan, you can see the array of support spaces for residents and workers in the village. From the top is the admin building with 2 private counseling rooms, an office space, and a de-escalation room which can also be used as a health clinic. Across the covered walkway is the communal kitchen and multi-purpose room, where the village can host events and informal gatherings. The multi-purpose space also has computer access for residents. Connected to that space is a private meeting room for daily life skill lessons for private meetings like Erin. Outside, there's a communal garden that can be used with the life skills classes and give job opportunities within the village. There's a view facing that community kitchen, as well as the outdoor walkway with a covered carport. And here's another view of that covered walkway, the entry into the village. The communal garden around the back is here and breaks down the scale of outdoor space. And then here's another view of the covered pergola. This is the interior of that multi-purpose space where residents can convene. We felt it was important to give the residents a space to be outside of their homes, to simply be and interact with each other. The last portion of the site design was the aggregation of the individual dwelling units. The dwelling units are mirrored to face each other to foster smaller, more intimate connections between residents. And the overall aggregation intends to break down the larger site into smaller, more individualized scales, which makes the village feel more individualized and provide a sense of ownership for themselves.
Now, we will talk about the dwelling unit design. In designing the exterior of the units, we wanted to focus on using cost-efficient and durable materials, choosing the combination of corrugated metal panels and wood siding for more inviting entrances. This render of a single standalone unit shows what a resident will experience when coming home. When designing the unit, we focus on 4 main design objectives: privacy, security, storage, and dignity. Each of these objectives were selected based on research and outreach, which suggested that these were the main necessities for individuals without addresses to have and to incorporate into our design for the dwelling unit.
The unit includes 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen, and a shared living space. The bathroom, kitchen, and cabinetry with the right fixtures are designed to be accessible to those who are not able to walk. Plenty of storage is incorporated throughout the unit to help residents with any belongings that they may come in, as well as provide spaces for those that may have nothing to offer. Here is an image showing what it would feel like to enter the space. We're greeted with an open living space characterized by warm wood tones and a subdued palette to establish an inviting feel. Accented walls can be done in several colors to allow for a sense of personalization and ownership of the unit. Taking a section across the main hall, we can see the entrance sequence from the front door to the wall storage in the back. The bedroom doors are seen with a better view of the terrace-door windows above that allow for more natural sunlight to enter the space. At the end of the hall is a utility closet that would be locked only to be accessed by admin. On the other side of this section, we have a clear view of the living space, kitchen, and bathroom. The kitchen and living space are divided by extra storage and prep space. More storage is incorporated between the bathroom and kitchen that serves as an open pantry space. Windows are placed in each of these areas to allow for more daylight, also with added track lighting to keep the space well lit. A section through the entire unit shows the relationship between the main living space and bedroom. A lower roof provides a cozier and more private feel for the bedrooms, whereas a higher pitched roof and clerestory windows on the other side create a grander shared living space. To finish, we would like to leave you with this view of the bedroom, showcasing the built-in storage space and how it would look populated with personal items and how a resident would inhabit this private space. Thank you.
So we have about 6 of our students here from that studio to field your questions.
I really love the ambition of this studio. And I guess, you know, in terms of I wanted to ask a question about the relationship with, or your thoughts about the kind of engagement you had with the community. I mean, one of the things that's always, you know, having taught courses that are like this, where you're going out to the community and you're trying to kind of develop an understanding of what their needs are. One of the most challenging things is always like kind of setting aside what you think that they need and really listening to them. And I'm curious to hear from the students, you know, because as you were working through this process, what were some things about the engagement of the community that that surprised you? Things that, you know, maybe challenged your own assumptions? And then the last question would be then, you know, and how did the community then respond to the work that you all developed in response to what you understood their aims to be.
Okay. So the difference to work.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
The difference to work with community themselves, it was very challenging because we had some dual perspective as architects or future architects. We want to have everything open, very light and everything, but we also saw that necessity for the community of privacy and feel secure in their own home. So that was something that it challenged us in the design. And yeah, well, I think that's for me. But at the same time, it was very well rewarded when they saw the improvement that we did from the first iteration. They respond very well too.
Yeah, we had a couple meetings with some residents of the initial Hope Village here in Newark. And that was a big kind of factor in some of the perspective for this project. Like Kenya was saying, there's kind of a lot of, I guess, basic like drivers as architects that we have when it comes towards design, but really we wanted to focus on like the needs of our client, which are people without addresses. And so that's why we had those four main design aspects, because those four things were really the key ideas that kept being brought up in all of these meetings. And just having those ideas incorporated already kind of provided like a very like accepting response to the project. And then everything outside of that was just even more kind of just like appreciation, because really all that they wanted were those kind of bare minimum aspects of the design. So
to kind of further comment on that, I would say in the beginning of the semester, we set certain criteria for ourselves and certain programs that we thought we needed to include. And then in the beginning course of the semester, we met with some of the social workers and the homelessness czar, and they provided insight on that. So we incorporated that. And then we also met with the residents themselves, and they gave us additional feedback, and some of it was controversial to what we had thought. Some of it was controversial to what the homelessness czar and the social workers said. So it was a matter of just taking all the information that we received, synthesizing it, and then composing it into one project that we thought met the needs of everyone in the best way possible.
Remind me, what level is this studio again? What level are you all in terms of?
We're fourth and fifth years.
Yeah,
Fourth
so this
and
is
fifth
an
years.
option studio with fourth and fifth years.
Okay.
Not an advanced studio, although they did produce a construction document set.
Yeah, I could see that in the drawings. I guess the question that I had is, I mean, I think that the kind of experience, in this kind of a course, and I really want to applaud the faculty who kind of set this framework up, and like also likewise want to applaud the students for really being able to kind of negotiate all the kind of frictions that you come to see. One group wants one thing, another group wants something else, and trying to understand the role of the architect to kind of filter through that. But in the end, being able to kind of produce a proposal which we hope, we all hope as architects, meets the kind of aims and ambitions of the groups that we're working with. One last question. I'm going to let Brian jump in really quickly. Did you all work together? Did you all break up the various aspects of the project? So like, a team of students worked on the threshold building, another team worked on the kind of community building, another team worked on the housing. How was that? How did you all kind of navigate that whole aspect of it?
Sorry. We split it up. We divided into two groups for like the final production. So it was one group fully devoted to the dwelling unit and getting really into the specifics of the construction set with that. And then another group working in more schematic design of the site development and the community buildings, as well as the fence and entry.
Before we arrived at that, we also started the semester individually kind of looking at precedents. And then from there, we were separated into groups. And in those groups, the idea was that we had 3 groups going into like our midterm proposal, which was one of our first meetings with stakeholders outside of the school. And going into that, we wanted to present three maybe not drastically, but different proposals. That way we were also kind of combating the idea that everyone will kind of wanted different things. So kind of making sure that we weren't putting all our eggs in one basket and being diversified in the projects that we presented.
The entire studio was just a very large collaborative effort. And although we tried to sort of separate some of, kind of the individual kind of like sight lines of the project, we are all constantly going back and forth, kind of either for reassurance or making sure everyone's on the same point, or getting other ideas if we're hitting a wall. And so it very much functioned like its own office, and that was a great experience. And I thought it was very helpful in, the entire creation of the project, because it's hard to get all of these ideas from just one or two different minds. So.
I think this is an incredible studio. It's so amazing to see that process that you just described, and to learn about how you work together as a large group, how it involves getting you outside of the studio, engaging with various community stakeholders, and somehow iterating and processing that and refining the design and getting it to the level of development that you did all in one semester is kind of mind-blowing. I'm really impressed by that. And I think it's totally inspiring to see that work. One thing I was thinking about in looking at the work is, well, a couple of things. I was reflecting on one of the aspects I enjoy the most about the project is the kind of attention to a series of nested scales. Like, you have design strategies that you spoke about at least 3 different scales. The scale of the entire community itself, right? The entire site plan, and how the units and the community buildings related to each other as a cohesive idea of the sort of large scale community. Then scaling into the sort of shared spaces, amenities for the residents where they come together, and the supportive services and a place for gathering. Scaling then also down to the spaces in between dwellings. I really like the diagram of sort of 2 units and their kind of shared entry, and the spaces in between that I presume could get programmed with outdoor activities, right? So sort of like scaling down even again, and then sort of within the unit itself, that even that is not singular, that there are 2 residents, and so there's a kind of micro community even within a particular residential unit. So I think it's really, I just really appreciate the way you thought about those multiple scales throughout the project, and did such a nice, sensitive job in addressing those. Although I guess I would ask sort of I have 2 questions I'll ask. One is, how did you see, I guess, relative to your own ideas, and then in relation to community feedback, how the sort of 2 resident model works? Like, what is the model of community within the dwelling unit that's being addressed here? And how flexible is that model? Is it an adult and a child? Is it 2 adults that didn't previously know each other? Are they family members? And then how do you think maybe, or have you thought about, or could your architectural design address changes in that, or variations within that model within the unit, let's say? I don't know if that makes sense. And then I guess the other question is just sort of bigger picture. Having gone through this process, I mean, what's amazing to me also is that it seemed like it's integrating so much of your knowledge and experience that you've gained throughout your previous 4 years in the program, and from design studios to technical courses, community engagement, training, etc. What's common in a project like this, or really any project in architecture, is that it will face challenges with budget, right? And if you were to have to pull money out, like, what would you hold on to most dearly? Like, what do you think? It's a way of asking maybe what the value is of what you as architectural designers, or as architects, as community collaborators, bring to the project. Like, what do you think is most essential here?
So we designed for 2 people because we found that was the best, both economically and talking to a lot of people. When people are homeless, they do tend to pair up for survival purposes. So a lot of time people will stick to 1 or 2 people together. So bringing them in as pairs, it lets them live in the same house and kind of rely on that survival for as long as they feel necessary until they would transition on to different types of housing from this model. And then I guess in terms, if we had to cut budget, I guess the most important thing was just be to keep the shelter, the materials and all that aspect, like that can all be changed accordingly, whether it's like in New Jersey or if it had to change temperate, it could get completely different materials. But I think just the idea of having a private bedroom, having a space to cook, having a bathroom all under one roof is kind of like giving them the basic essentials of a house in the tiny house is what they needed.
All right, thank you guys. Round of applause for the next project is also in Newark. It's in the Lincoln Park Coast District. It's called Shaping the Future of Cities, Rethinking the 20-Minute Neighborhood Through the Lens of Equity.
Hello everyone, my name is Valentin Platzgummer, and today I'm going to present you my project, Lincoln Park Gallery. The project is one of 15 proposals developed during the Option Studio 1, led by Roger Smith. The focus of the studio was set on the concept of the 20-minute neighborhood. This idea refers to an urban design principle where essentially daily needs such as grocery stores, schools, parks, and other amenities are within a 20-minute walk or bike ride from a person's home. In the first parts of the studio, we did research and data collection on a broad spectrum, not only to identify the main issues, but also to discover new potential and rethink existing structures and connections in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. In the second part of the studio, every student selected a site and started to design and develop a project based on the research. My selected site is located in the northern part of the Lincoln Park green space between Broad Street and the Stark District. The concept was to create a gallery building directly connected to the park. The goal was to maintain as much trees as possible and to add more floral diversity into the green space. The idea was to create a platform for local artists to showcase their artworks and to create a space where people could meet and socially connect. The building itself should be a landmark for the arts and culture scene and make Lincoln Park a central point known for its diversity in the field of arts. Lifting up the terrain, I could implement the gallery space underneath. This passive design concept should maintain as much green space as possible and create new usable space. The roof is basically an artificial landscape extension which should create an amphitheater-like sitting area with an open-air stage for the music festival, for demonstrations and all kinds of events. The program is layered in a hierarchical way and organized based on the needs of natural light. On the lower level, there are different kinds of exhibition spaces with different ceiling heights, meanwhile the upper level are more spaces like administration, the lobby, and a bar. Different light shafts and openings into the building, the museum seems to be very transparent and offers the visitor different site access. So, for example, people from the outside can watch into the gallery and reverse. This last slide, you can see the building from the exterior. As you can see, it is integrated very well in its surrounding, and it's only visible partially. The shape of the building should inspire and invite the visitor to use the space, but also to spend the time there and be part of a growing community. Thanks for your attention.
Maybe just to give a bit more context, I was asked to select one student, but this was a collective project, and there were ultimately 15 students with 15 separate projects identified by them based on their research of both vulnerability of communities. They selected a neighborhood that they felt needed a kind of collective vision for how all of these elements could work together. This happens to be a neighborhood that's very much focused on the arts community and the arts itself. They really want to develop it into an arts district, but it has challenges. So some of the other projects that were involved in this were not only the museum dedicated to art, both art and music, because it's a music festival, a very large music festival that's held there every year, that has amazing community engagement. Other projects were housing, neighborhood business. There was a library, healthcare facilities. All of these came together as a kind of collective whole, and that's what it made it interesting for I think all of us.
So Roger, this was one student's project then that came out of that.
That's right. That's right. And as I said, some projects dealt with health. There was another project that dealt with housing for for the families of incarcerated folks. So not just transitional housing for those who are coming out of incarceration, but for the families that are sort of in desperation once they're incarcerated and left alone to raise a family. So there were those kinds of issues embedded in this as well. And this particular project that Valentin focused on was about engaging the park in a very different way, both through the art and through the use of the park, but also instilling a sense of pride in the community, so that again, that was very much a part of the thinking for many of these students. But again, 15 separate projects, separate programs, all coming together to look at this notion of the 20-minute neighborhood through an equitable lens. So the research that was done prior to this, which would have been great to show, would have looked at what challenges face the city ultimately, and how do you begin to think about this idea of walkability and having all the assets of a community within a finite neighborhood, a kind of 20-minute walkable neighborhood. So it was a very interesting project, and the students were engaged with the many community stakeholders as a part of the process. The deputy mayor and planner were part of the process as well, and students will be reassembling this semester to present the collective work to the administration or to the mayor himself. So that's where we were. I wish Valentin were here to give you more insight into the student experience.
Roger, I think that the ambition of this studio is pretty phenomenal and so important. I think so. In terms of the programs that you mentioned, did the students sort of kind of develop those programs in response to engagement with the community, or were they given those programs like, here's a list of programs you might choose from? And
yeah, there were a couple things. Students started out with research on that conducted urban mapping of the city of Newark. So they looked at environment, climate, vulnerability, transportation, infrastructure, building form, economics, all of that. And then they were asked to look at those issues relative to equity. And so they identified a neighborhood then that was in need of a kind of rethinking of what a neighborhood structure can be and what the components of that were. And then once they did that, they scoured the neighborhood to identify sites that would ultimately create a kind of critical mass for activity and vibrancy in the neighborhood, which was challenging, but very much satisfying once the students began to see their work collectively and understand its potential impact. So that's how it was structured.
yeah, I think one of the things that it would have been, I think from my perspective, it would have been really interesting and useful to see how Valentin's project sits within the kind of full constellation of all the other projects. Because I think this idea of, identifying kind of programs and how they develop synergies with each other, and they kind of, that one exists because of and in support of another program, like that's really the whole kind of framework of the studio. So I think that I think would be pretty helpful. And I I know you all are getting ready for an accreditation visit, and I'm just sort of thinking ahead, for a team who's coming in and how they might be able to best view the work, is that it's not a kind of a discrete project that's sitting on its own site.
Absolutely.
But that it's within kind of a broader constellation of other projects that have been developed deliberately because of kind of programmatic overlaps or synergies between them. So, but I really appreciate the ambition of this project and this studio that you've set up, and be curious to see what happens next with this, with the work as it moves forward. It's it's difficult work, but it's important work that needs to happen as well.
Yeah, Roger, I would offer similar congratulations on the studio, because it's really fascinating and challenging, I think, to get to work for you as a critic to work for 15 projects, certainly. But I think for the students to be able to kind of think like a network, and I feel like I wish we were there in person and we could see more of the work, because we're looking at the studio, which sounds like it's driven so much by the kind of community development and sort of urbanist agendas, and we're looking through the lens of one architectural and landscape design project, which is beautifully executed, it should be said. But I know I would love to see sort of that bigger picture, so I echo what Julie was just saying about that. And I guess that what I wonder, maybe as a kind of provocation, is in thinking about a studio like this and how the students can process the sort of what architecture can bring in this urban context with this idea of the 20-minute neighborhood as the framework. I'm wondering, one scenario is, if I understand it correctly, as it's described, where there are multiple projects in different sites throughout the neighborhoods of the city, each with different programming. I guess another way to think about it might be to flip it and say that there are multiple kind of community stations that have hybrid programmings, so that there are connections. So rather than saying this is where the art gallery is and this is where the housing services are, whatever it might be, it's that there are outposts throughout the neighborhood that intersect multiple factors and engage different communities simultaneously with kind of hybrid programming. And it might be that sort of suggests a kind of more sort of direct engagement with this kind of urban networking sort of modeling that the students could do, sort of looking at overlays and engagements between different aspects and different community members, and how the architecture might facilitate a kind of multiple use condition.
Yeah, I love that. I love that comment. I love all the comments, and I think that is useful. And in some ways, it did come out in the work. Again, I think for an effective presentation of this work, you have to see multiple students and see the collective, because what came out of much of their research, albeit challenging, was that housing was essential. So many of the projects were embedded with housing, but what you did with the base of the building as a community engagement element was what created that hybridization that you're talking about. And it was actually fascinating because the way they related to that. In one case, it was artist housing, and how that was related to the lower. There was another one that had housing and a kind of incubator space and maker space that was a part of that. So it created this sort of desire for both the need for housing, which they saw as critical for wealth building, and some of the engagement with the community was pretty fantastic, because they even began to think through the idea that renting is not enough, that creating a way of renting to home ownership might actually be a model that can begin to foster another way of thinking about building wealth in communities of need. So some of the things you're talking about actually occurred in various ways. I guess looking back at it for myself, I think more time for the students to really digest this notion of the synergies between the different projects, I think would be great to focus on. And Julie, you made that point, and I think that was a very good one. So I think there may be opportunity for this in the future.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce Steve Zdepski. Steve is the coordinator of the fifth year Advanced Studios. Steve also lends his administrative oversight to the graduate studios, which also do the same essentially the same project and fulfill the same role in terms of what the accreditation board does. And I think he'll get into some of the detail. I'll leave it to him. And then we'll look at 6 projects, and then we'll take a break. And then the 2 projects after the break will be the same site, but at the graduate level. So I give you Steve Zdepski, and Steve, try to outside voice.
Thank you. Hi. Well, the studio about your C is unusual in the school in that it in effect merges the graduate and undergraduate courses together. That doesn't really happen in earlier semesters. Obviously, there's a different background in the student and a different amount of time to do the teaching. The Advanced Studio 1, which is the work you're going to be seeing, really bridges the core studios and the Advanced Studio 2, whose primary responsibility is to approve the National Accrediting Board requirements, the 10 NAB requirements for accreditation. At the Advanced Studio 2 level, which is what the students for the most part are taking now, there is a second course called Synthesis Seminar, which is dedicated very much to proving those requirements. The studio you're about to see bridges their experience right now and, as I say, the earlier core studios. So it touches on all the 10 criteria, but we've also added, or haven't forgotten more correctly, criteria having to deal with architectural history and theory, design process, and presentation, which aren't specifically part of what we're calling the NAB 10. Design problem is located in Prague. It's at a site that at one time was a neo-Gothic city hall that the Germans blew up prior to their retreat from the city at the end of World War II. They've had numerous design competitions to try to figure out how to fill up this hole in the urban context. It's the center of the city. It's probably one of the most important and famous urban squares, certainly in Europe. So we've taken that on. And to that, we've added the responsibility to design a concert hall of a very specific type, a shoebox form concert hall for the purposes of designing the acoustical and environmental setting for fundamentally early classical music, where concert halls were shoebox in form and the music was designed for that. We are approach the design to look at each of the 10 NAB criteria reasonably equally from site, program, structure, etc. We did not specifically address energy performance or sustainability. That's the focus of this semester. Frankly, trying to deal with the basic issues first, and then the more complex issues and the newer issues that the NAB added very recently this semester. So you're going to there are not a lot of differences between the undergraduate curriculum and the graduate curriculum. The course is written the same. It has the same references, the same requirements, the same schedule. Really, they're, for the most part, really one course. They're very close together, except for the students that are walking in the door. So with that, I think it's time to look at the first project.
Hello everyone, this is the Fall 2022 Advanced Architectural Studio 1 presenting the Staromestske concert hall proposals to be located in Old Town Square, Prague, Czech Republic. The site plan shows the site boundary and the building boundary of the project. Square has been the center of the Old Town ever since it was founded. It has undergone many alterations in the course of the intervening centuries and includes fragments of almost every historical style. The concert hall aims to complete the historical town square of the city, filling in the 75-year void in the urban fabric. Today, the square hosts seasonal markets at Christmas and Easter, public concerts, informal markets, vendors, and street performers. The site of the concert hall has a unique urban setting. The closest vehicle traffic road to the site is the Pražská Boulevard. To the north of the concert hall site, the Baroque Church of St. Nicholas stands. To the west, there is a line of medieval townhouses along a narrow pedestrian walk. To the south, the Gothic facade of the old town hall stands with its connected clock tower. Across the site, another Gothic-style church stands. Therefore, the site of the new concert hall needs to successfully relate and complete these adjacencies. This image shows the existing courtyard typologies around the square. While these images show the delicately decorated and lightly colored facades frequently adorned with gable roofs dominating the square. The functional requirements of the project is divided into two main parts, public functions and performance functions. The public functions include programs such as the lobby, coat check, bar area, the house, the concert hall's private exterior courtyard, and courtyards at the ground level. While the performance functions consist of musicians' lobby, lounges, stage, choir loft, suites, rehearsal room, and dressing rooms. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Zehra Dulgeroglu, and this is my proposal for the Staromestske concert hall located in Old Town Square, Prague. The design intends to create spaces where public can move, experience music, and also architecture. The proposal understands the urban conditions and the qualities of the surrounding fabric as it responds to the scale of the immediate context, which are the town hall and the St. Nicholas Church. The building stands in between these two landmarks and tries to establish its own existence by reflecting the qualities of its time with a contemporary approach. The building is divided into two realms, for the artist and the audience. The concert hall stands in the middle and connects these two worlds. The concert hall and the public programs are elevated, while the programs for the artists are grounded. With the position of the exterior public space leading to the main entrance, on the ground level, the design respects the boundaries of the church and creates a public plaza both for the church and for itself. When the surrounding buildings are analyzed, a period three-part scheme can be seen, with the ground floor open to public, the middle part, and finally the sloped or gabled roofs of the buildings. Therefore, the design mimics these qualities by having an open public space at the ground level, containing concert hall in the middle, which is the main program, and creating a terrace at the top with sloped roofs. The evolution diagram shows the concert hall sitting at the center and the facade divided into three parts based on the scale of the building around. And finally, the addition of the columns to create a transitional public space in between the square and the building. The axonometric view of the building shows the scale of the project, the public space on the ground level, the roofscape, and finally the roof terrace. The first diagram shows how the concert hall stands in between the programs for the audience and artists, whereas the right one shows exterior public spaces both on the ground level and the terrace on the roofs. The stairs from both the public and artist side ascend and meet at the roof terrace, where there is weaving stairs facing the square. The diagram on the right shows other forms of circulation. These diagrams show how both the facade and the structure becomes lighter, inviting, and open as you go towards public programs where the St. Nicholas Church is located. These set of diagrams illustrate how the glass roof allows the sunlight to penetrate into the building plaza on the ground level. These diagrams demonstrate the HVAC systems with different zone and the accessibility of the building. As mentioned before, the public main entrance faces the church, inviting people coming both from the boulevard and the square, while the artist entrance faces the town hall, which is the quiet and secluded side of the site, allowing more privacy. The ground floor plan shows the L-shaped configuration of the design with the column public space facing the church and the open amphitheater placed on the opposite arm. This plan also shows the qualities of the surrounding fabric, having double facade layers, some buildings making push and pulls towards the square. The design responds to these qualities by having a double facade with a curtain wall and a raised view. In between these facades, there are balconies where people can have glimpses of what's happening at the square. While from the top, with the roof terrace, the users have more holistic and unobstructed views of the square and the city. The design aims to make the facade part of the performances and festivals happening on the square, so it becomes a backdrop for the events happening based on the time of the day and year. The plan shows the concert hall sitting in the middle, the pushing and pullings of the double facade creating the balconies, and the forest of foam standing as a transitional space between the concert hall and the square. So moving through the columns, public space, the audience almost unveils the curtain between the building and the square. Elevations shows the changes in the density and facade based on the exposure of the sun and programs. The section shows the concert hall, the double facade facing the square, and the artists and service programs underground. The longitudinal section shows how the concert hall sits in the middle, almost like a jewel, also the grounded artist side and the elevated public experience. The concert hall's placement is also a response to the common courtyard typology existed in the city of Prague, designing it for hidden and isolated from the rest of the building, with its own unique qualities, creating a world separated from the real world. Finally, these are some images of my physical model. Thank you.
I give you Zehra. I'm not going to try to pronounce your
Hi.
Zehra, I was just going to say quickly, that was an extremely well presented project. It was very comprehensive in its sort of overview, the way it set up the site context, the way you described the concept for the project, the way you then took us through the building and showed us through all a series of drawings, diagrams, axonometrics, plans and sections, technical drawings, experiential perspective images. So I was really impressed with that as an overview in terms of how you tell the story of an architectural proposal. So first of all, congratulations on that achievement. I wanted to ask a couple of questions, maybe, I guess, diving right in. At the end, you talked about the relationship between your scheme and the idea of the courtyards. And I wasn't quite sure how to interpret that. Did you mean to say that the concert hall itself as a volume, interior volume, is an evocation of the courtyard idea? And yes.
So what I mean by the courtyard idea was that the concert hall stays in the middle and it's an empty space for the most of the time. So it almost works as this impotence at the middle, just like the courtyard typologies in the city, and becomes filled with performances when there are performances. So that was kind of abstracting the idea of courtyard.
Gotcha. I see that maybe the back and forth is not so easy because of our technical setup here, but I guess what I would say in response is it's interesting to think about that as an urban concept translating into an architectural design proposal. Some things I'm thinking about are the possibilities for a view to the exterior, to the city from the concert hall, even a controllable one that can be closed or opened. I'm thinking of OMA's concert hall in Porto, in Portugal, the Casa de Música, that has a sort of aperture at the end, a big view back to the city. So some kind of connection, or even maybe to think about whether the exterior shell of the concert hall shoebox itself is in any places able to become porous and connect back. Because I guess what I'm most curious about in the scheme, and I couldn't quite discern, is the threshold between you come into the forest of columns, which is very clear as an urbanistic threshold, but then where do we actually go through the door into the enclosure of the space, and what do we see in terms of the shoebox, and how porous or not is that? So like that's that transitional zone that I'm most fascinated to see how you handled it. I guess one other thing I was thinking about is how you conceived of the vertical plane of the building in relation to the square. You did mention in the one image that it can serve as a kind of abstract backdrop for events and markets and what have you. So presumably getting animated with light or projections or whatever else, signage. But it's also a kind of, you showed very carefully the sort of like scenographic quality of all of these facades and their profiles and such. And I'm curious to know a little bit more about how you feel your building addresses that idea of kind of facade and profile in dialogue with those surrounding buildings or not?
So mostly I was interested in while I was doing my facade designs, I was interested in looking at the sun, but also thinking about square so that the facade doesn't only stays as an architecture move, but also becomes part of the performances or the events at the square. So on the other hand, on other parts of my building, I was thinking like the idea of going from heavy to light as you go to the public site, and I assigned more heavy materials or dense materials on the performer's site, so that it's more private, more grounded, more secluded. But on the other hand, as you go, the density of the facade becomes lighter and lighter, kind of inviting and creating an open atmosphere for the audience or public.
Yeah, I want to echo Brian's comments about appreciating the thoroughness and the clarity with which you took us through your project. It was very easy for me to follow and to kind of understand what your intentions were and how those played out through the kind of architectural proposition. For me, if I one of the other things that I thought about as you were presenting is I was particularly taken by the kind of one of your early diagrams, and it might have been when you were setting up you're sharing the setup from the whole studio, understanding the history of this site, over time and the various ways in which it had been occupied, but then ending with the kind of potential of what it could be and kind of highlighting adjacencies and understanding those particular uses and the kind of the life, the annual, kind of life of the square. And so for me, one of the things I found myself wondering as you were taking us through the building is that, I think that the opportunity to kind of understand the reciprocity with which, kind of a discrete building begins to play with the kind of the adjacency. So in many ways, while you're drawing clues from kind of adjacent uses, how does the project kind of give something back? And I think that, this builds on Brian's questions about the kind of porosity, because I think that, once you're brought into the building, through the kind of, sequence of movement through the kind of forest of the columns, and you move into the kind of interior spaces, I found myself wondering sort of similar questions of like, well, how does the project then give back to the surroundings? Like in what ways is there this kind of, other sets of relationships that can be fostered, whether it's kind of, the visual thresholds, looking across the square. At what point as I'm moving through the building and perhaps I'm on my way to my seat that I happen to look over my left or my right shoulder and I say like, oh, there is the church that's across the square. And so you begin to think about how the building itself, through the facade that you've articulated and developed, becomes a device that mediates our view from inside to outside. Or conversely, if I'm outside and I'm engaging, in activities in the square, as dusk starts to fall, the lights come up in the theater building. At what point do I start to see the presence of people moving, adjacent to the screen? So those are the kinds of things that I started, that came to my mind as you were taking us through the project. And I would imagine that maybe some of these similar themes will come up, over the course of the next series of projects that we're going to be looking at.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Erin Volpe. I'll be presenting my project, which is a Cruzado. My project focuses on its connection to the surrounding historical context and the incorporation of nature and sustainable elements. My concept is broken into three parts: flow of nature, flow of program, and flow of context. Flow of nature depicts the connection between the interior spaces within the natural outdoor environment created by the park. Flow of program refers to the curved form of the building that connects each of its programs. Flow of context refers to the connection between the visitors inside of the building with the surrounding historical context of the old town square. From the start, I knew that it was important to incorporate vegetation into my project. This was due to the positive influence and effect that greenery has in an urban setting, as well as the rising threat of climate change due to the CO2 emissions given off by the building sector. Several green roofs are incorporated into the project that collect stormwater that is treated for building use. Trees reduce the energy used during the changing seasons and absorb carbon dioxide. I took inspiration from buildings designed by famous architects such as Shah, known for futuristic aesthetics and curved construction, as well as Frank Gehry for his unique building facades and nature incorporations. I also took inspiration from conceptual mid-journey studies to further gain a basis for what I envisioned my project to be. This project is based in the historic Old Town Square in Prague. The site currently sits as a park immersed with walkways, trees, and vegetation, and is directly adjacent to the Old Town Square. My design incorporates a park that sits directly on top of the building and contains trees, vegetation, and gardens. From throughout the building, different areas allow for sightlines to the surrounding context of the Old Town Square, including the clock tower and churches adjacent to the square. The public areas are on the north side of the building, while the private areas are on the south side of the building. The circulation follows the same pattern with egress for the concert hall on opposing sides of the building and private egress on the south side. The basement holds the majority of mechanical spaces, as well as the administrator offices, general storage rooms, and access to the stage. These spaces are underground to allow the ground level programs to be mostly public and accessible. The building entry is on the east side of the building, directly facing the square. The lobby connects to the bar and cafe, as well as the corridors that provide access to the concert hall and rear courtyard. The ground level also contains the rehearsal space, musician rooms, and access to the choir loft. The second floor is accessible through monument stairs from the lobby and provides access to the loft seats in the concert hall. The opposing end of the building contains the private program, including the guest suites. There is also access to the two terraces on the east and west sides of the building. The park has access from the lobby, east terrace, and private egress. Green lawns, trees, gardens, and vegetation make up most of the park. The east and west terraces of the park contain paths leading to the interior spaces of the building. The east elevation faces the Old Town Square and is encompassed by large windows and greenery. The programs on the facade include the bar cafe, lobby, and east terrace. The north elevation exposes the lobby with large windows that cover the facade. The west elevation is on the rear of the site, which houses a courtyard and pathway to get around the building. Its facade mirrors that of the east facade. The south elevation contains most of the private programs of the building, so windows are limited. The concert hall itself is centered in the middle of the building, allowing for easy access and connection to the outdoor spaces. The town square is adjacent to the building's entrance and allows for an easy flow of pedestrian traffic. GFRC acts as a permanent framework to encompass the building structure. The building's curved form is possible due to the vast capabilities of GFRC. The green roof contains structure and drainage layers, which forces a thicker floor. The building has a steel structure with concrete cased steel composite columns to maximize support strength. Rather than a traditional shoebox shape, the concert hall is oval shaped, thus requiring a greater ceiling height and convex GFRC panels located throughout the house. The park and green spaces allow the building to have a proper rainwater collection system for human use. Also incorporated is a gray water system that is filtered for plant use. The building receives plenty of sunlight throughout the day to shine over the park and allow light into the building. At the entry to the building, a large overhang pulls pedestrians into the lobby. Once in the lobby, visitors are met with a coat collection counter and information desk. The elevator and monument stairs are available for vertical circulation to the upper floors. The second floor is open above the ground floor with plenty of views of the surrounding area. The barn cafe follows the curved shape of each facade wall and offers views into the Old Town Square. The concert hall features curved geopharsy panels, curved walls that open to the outdoor terraces, and loft seating on the second floor. The park has small inclines throughout that transition park visitors to different parts. The intention behind the paths is to allow visitors to see and explore the surrounding context. The physical model is a 3D print that shows the overall form in greater detail. It was printed in sections to show the characteristics of the concert hall itself. Thank you.
Seems like a start.
Hi there. It's Anthony, right? Anthony, thank you for the presentation. There's one thing that I really appreciated about your project from the beginning, which is the idea that you're looking at the historical condition of the site after the building was demolished, was bombed, right? And that a park has been present there since that time. And so anytime we're going to make a change, that's something that it has its own history now, right? That park, even though it came after something else and followed a great loss, it actually has many decades of presence in the city as something that may have meaning to the residents, right? And so the idea that your building replaces that site, what I think is great about your proposal is that it suggests to create continuity with that more recent history by kind of reproducing an urban park as part of the square of Prague, but albeit elevated, right? So I think that's like the key thing that I'm responding strongly to in your project. But I guess there's a couple of things I'm thinking about in relation to that. One is, it wasn't clear to me if residents of the city have access to that rooftop landscape without entering the building, right? Is there an exterior kind of connection? I'll let you answer it after I give you my comments. If there isn't, I think there would be something to explore. I think that would be something interesting, so that the park has an independent use outside of the function of the concert hall for people who are not attending concerts. I think then it would be more public and would be fully engaged with the city. The other thing is, I was thinking about the design of the park itself in relation to the building design, and thinking about when we put landscape on structure, it's different than we put landscape embedded into the ground plane itself. And thinking about how this being a project or a semester that was focused on kind of developing some resolution with the structural design and such, that it could be interesting to think about how the design of that park space, the scale of vegetation that you plant, and the layout of that respond in some way to the logic of the building, even simply in recognition that the kinds of trees that you're proposing in those renderings suggest a really large depth of planting space, right, for that soil space for those trees. And so maybe there are some areas of the roof that have more shallow depth and some that have deeper depth based on what's happening with the structure, that there could be a kind of registration between those two factors. Thinking about one other issue quickly is in relation to the environmental performance of the building design. You're showing a lot of glass and a lot of unprotected glass on all facades. And I think I still need to figure out myself where north is in the site plan of the square. But I'm wondering if maybe you should look at creating a kind of facade strategy that starts to screen some of the harsher sunlight as it comes into the spaces, because I think you're going to get kind of a lot of undesirable heat gain and glare coming in some cases and not in others. So I think there might be a way of thinking about the strategy of the facade that kind of reflects the uniqueness of each of those facades the facade orientations, not only in terms of how they speak visually to the city, but how they address the sort of external environmental factors like sunlight.
Yeah, I think that I'm also like every time I see the plan or the facade, perspectives of the project, I'm always finding myself when they're like, okay, which way is north, which way is, and I believe that the main, if I'm understanding correctly, if I'm remembering correctly, that the main facade that faces the square is the east facade, east facing facade. So Anthony, your project raises questions for me that like I wrote down some notes of like, it raises questions of like, what does it mean to be contextual? And just for the record, I don't think that being contextual means it has to mimic, or mirror exactly what's there. But I think there are other ways in which we can start to integrate kind of contextual languages into the work that we do, whether it's thinking about governing lines, understanding kind of like a base of a building, a body, how it meets the sky, kind of a rhythm, of openings, many different ways that, we can start to, consider, our interventions into urban fabrics, such as, the one that you're operating in here, as kind of clues to help us, understand ways to be contextual. So your project, your proposal raises that question in my mind, like, I wonder what, where the, this question of what it means to be contextual. Scale is another one that that comes to my mind, and that I think that while I appreciate the kind of ambition of the project and the kind of exuberance of it, I find myself wondering like, well, what about the scale of like, how do I enter into the building? Where's the scale of the figure as we're moving through? I too appreciated the proposal for the inclusion of a park that's lifted. I echo Brian's question, is it still open to the public? Because I think that if it were, then it's a generous proposal, right? Saying like, okay, we're putting this this performance space here, but we're still giving something back. It goes back to what I was talking about in the previous project, this idea of reciprocity. But I feel like, in this proposal, I find myself kind of wondering, is there, would there have been an opportunity for you to kind of to step back and say, let me recalibrate a little bit and think about kind of the scale of the kind of needing to support this kind of green roof, the scale of the actual theater space, which, gets, I see it in plan as kind of like an egg shape, which then I say like, well, how does that then work with kind of another kind of set of geometries, another rhythm? So you begin to understand kind of, point and counterpoint, heaviness versus lightness, a kind of a stereotomic versus a skeletal. And so I think that those are kind of nuances that I think can help strengthen the overall proposal. Because at the moment, at least from my reading, it feels very like it reads at one scale and kind of one reading. And I find myself wanting to kind of get to a finer grain. It becomes clearest to me when you start showing examples, some of the views of like the park, right? And the pavement, it's just kind of like this undifferentiated ribbon of, concrete. But I find myself wondering, well, what were the pavers? Could there have been some consideration of the kind of rhythm of, the joints in that kind of path? How does the grass, come up and meet it? Does it come just right up next to it? Or is there kind of like an edge condition there that mediates between the kind of porous surface of the grass and then the kind of hardscape surface of the path? So these are all things that, I find myself looking forward and wondering about. So I know that this was last semester's project. So I guess, as you're moving forward in this semester, I think these are all things that I think can help strengthen the overall proposal. If we're able to kind of, step back and say, okay, what am I really trying to achieve here? What are the intentions? What are the ways in which I can begin to kind of calibrate or kind of balance things out? And then also just, remembering, just the scale of the human body, in those spaces.
I think, Anthony, if I were just to quickly add one last thing, and listening to Julie's feedback also, I'm thinking about the the really kind of dramatic and quite amazing space you produced for the concert hall itself, and the way you brought the clerestory light in, and that's sort of a celebration at the center of the building, using these kind of sculpted GFRC enabled forms, right? But then the status of the building that surrounds it, the kind of shell that encapsulates that egg, has a quite different layout and different geometries, but then uses the same kind of plastic geometries and materiality. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity there, maybe to set up a contrast, to either change materials to reflect that different ordering system, or to maintain the geometries of the sort of shell construction of the concert hall, sort of like one or the other. It felt like you changed something dramatic, which is the sort of compositional geometries, but then you didn't change the material or the kind of formal makeup. And so that there's a little bit of a tension there that I'm thinking could be resolved more productively. But I really appreciated the project. Thanks, Anthony.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So to address first the is the park open to the public if the concert hall is not in use? Yes, it would be. I would imagine it would be open. People would be able to come in even if there wasn't a concert going on, or if it wasn't in session. There's no exterior access to the park that people could use, but I imagine the building would be closed at night but open during the day, so people can still come in and use it if they wish. And I do think that the interior of the concert hall could definitely be changed in some way, whether it's material-wise or some sort of different shape or something, so it's different from the GFRC that's on the exterior shell of the building itself. That's something I didn't really think about too much.
Just to respond quickly, I would do the opposite.
Yeah, I would too. I would do the GFRC on the orchestra hall and then do something different with the kind of main facade of the building.
Or really develop that GFRC skin to become a kind of thermal and light performance shroud of some sort. Thanks, Anthony.
Yep, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Arryl Buenaventura, and this is my design proposal for the Staromestske Concert Hall. My proposal is deeply rooted in the building's connection to the immediate site context, envisioning it to be an essential landmark that seamlessly connects and further activates Old Town Square for the concert attendees and the general public. Key design strategies were established through site studies. The alleyway along the clock tower is currently used as a delivery point for adjacent buildings, making the southeast corner the optimal location for the concert hall's delivery access. This portion of the building is also the more private section of the site, ideal for private entry for musicians, composers, staff, etc. There are existing dining and lodging establishments along the Mikolaska Path, and introducing more dining options in that portion of the building creates a mini food square. An outdoor park facing St. Nicholas Church creates a threshold and connection to the concert hall. Offsetting from the buildable area accommodates these strategies. The theater is the most important programmatic element, and with its predetermined shoebox configuration, a north-south orientation is the optimal arrangement. The theater is raised to allow for public space on the first level. The two allotted exterior courtyards are essential to connect the building with the site, and a pathway is introduced to connect the two. The pathway is inspired by the alleyways and informal pedestrian paths along the site. Lowering the roof reveals the theater, allowing it to stand out. Mass was carved out for public space and an atrium opening to better integrate the exterior courtyards, the pathway, and Mikolaska Path with the concert hall. This strategy also addresses the active ground level requirement for Old Town Square. Roof lines along the northern portion of the building were further lowered for better visibility of the theater mass and visual connection to and from the square, as well as allow for more natural light to enter the atrium space. Model studies inform design strategies, mainly through the implementation of cutouts that separate the concert hall mass from the rest of the building, further signifying its importance. A majority of the first level is open-air public spaces. The courtyards, pathways, parks, and food square act as multiple entryways along the central public atrium. Concert attendees have elevator access and a stairway going up that also runs along the atrium. The pathway that connects the two courtyards allows for ease of travel and exploration of the concert hall, creating a seamless connection between site and building. Visitors are able to freely enter the public ground level, which also doubles as an amphitheater. The Atrium Amphitheater is a perfect space to lounge, enjoy a meal from the food square, and experience all kinds of public performances, all while being connected to Old Town Square. This space also allows visitors to visually experience the grandeur of the concert hall as it cantilevers over the space. Concert attendees are able to experience this even further as they travel up the stairway on their way into the concert hall. Upon entry to the second level are bars and lounges for the concert attendees to enjoy as they wait for the show to start and interact with one another at the end of the show. Similar to the first level, the circulation on the upper levels also revolve around the atrium space. The fourth level houses private programs like musician lounges and offices. The public and private programs are separated into two masses with the concert hall situated in the middle. There are two structural systems implemented since the theater is essentially separate from the building. A truss system supports the theater's wide spans and also supports its cantilevering condition. A diagrid system supports the open spans of the public spaces and also provides visual intrigue. The main materials used are steel and dyed precast concrete with colors that blend well with the colors of the surrounding buildings. Floor-to-ceiling double-glazed windows enhance visual connections to and from the square and introduces large amounts of sunlight while providing insulation to the large interior public spaces. Facade design strategies were implemented to ensure that the contemporary design of the concert hall would stand out while simultaneously being sensitive to the existing architecture. The diagrid structure takes inspiration from the gable roofscapes of Old Town Square. Similarly, the tripartite breakdown of the facade is similar to that of the facade designs of the surrounding buildings. The elevation facing the town square provides intrigue for people to want to experience the building, as the atrium cutout and open ground floor level are visible. The hierarchy of the concert hall mass ensures that it is visible from all elevations. The concepts of permeable architecture are important in this design and is evident through the connections made between interior space and the surrounding environment. The addition of pedestrian flow along with the atrium space allows the building to be an extension of the square. The Staromestske Concert Hall is an important urban landmark in Old Town Square and requires consideration of the user experience. The project brief calls for a building for experiencing a musical spectacle. This design proposes that the building itself is a public spectacle and cultivating culture and experiences for everybody. Thank you.
What did you guys?
Arryl, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Okay. Am I understanding your project that a ground floor plan drawing that you showed, that I thought I understood that that people might be able to walk through your building through the main lobby space as an extension of the square? Is it all like I could walk through your main lobby even if I were not going to go to a performance, like as a kind of a pass through?
Yeah,
Is
absolutely.
that true?
It's fully open to the public to enjoy, and there's multiple entryways into the public space and the atrium underground amphitheater.
Okay. Okay, I'm happy to hear that. Hear you confirm that, because I saw that and I was like, wow, it looks really. So there are a couple things that I wanted to say very quickly. One is that I really appreciated you sharing your process. Helped me understand kind of the things that you were thinking about. Even I think there was like, you had one model shot, or one of your screens showed like a heavy model and a light model, and sort of like decisions about why you made decisions to kind of, push down parts of the volume or raise up other parts. I mean, the diagrid, I think. So there are all these things that I began to understand very clearly, like how you were drawing from kind of clues from the kind of existing context, to help drive your design decisions. The thing that really speaks to me, though, is how you've taken the kind of the mass of the site and started to think about clever ways to bring it down to scale where suddenly I could be passing through the building as kind of a shortcut, on my way to something and participating with the life of the building, even though I may not be going to a performance there. And that to me is this kind of, incredibly generous act. Kind of this idea of giving the city, like maybe kind of like a foyer that they can occupy and kind of hang out in. So that I really, appreciated about your proposal, because it's brought in kind of this series of questions that I had asked Anthony before. It's like ideas about scale, so, how do you balance the kind of requirements of the scale that is necessary for kind of a performance theater and that all the kind of programs that you need to support it, but then also still managing to kind of have something that is, hospitable to the kind of human social condition of the square itself. So I really appreciated that. Those are some of the things that immediately came to my mind. Not really a question, just more comments, about the work that you just shared with us.
Arryl, to follow up on Julie's comments, I do have two questions real quick for you, which is, one is, what happens in the square to the west, like this sort of courtyard, I guess, that happens in the west, like between the concert hall and the surrounding context, in your scheme, in your proposal, what happens there? That's the thing you're connecting to, right? With that tunnel that you described. And then the other question is that amphitheater that you've carved out just adjacent to that pass through, that goes below grade. Is that part of the program that was given, or was that your kind of innovation?
So the answer to the first question, so on the west elevation, I should have shown a drawing, but it's a courtyard where people usually go to dine in because there's food establishments along that path. And so I wanted to really establish that elevation and path as like the food square, where people can enjoy food or even take food and go into the atrium space to enjoy it. To answer your second question, it wasn't a requirement programmatically. I just wanted to include it because I believe that this building should be first and foremost like for the public, since it is in this Old Town Square, and that it should be a landmark that can be used by everybody. So even though you're not a concert goer, you can enjoy performances there too, if they do offer it, depending on the day, whatever performance. But yeah.
Great. Yes, fantastic. I mean, as an urbanistic gesture, I really love it. I love that you're thinking like an urbanist and an architect here, that the building, to use Julie's term, is generous, like it's offering something to the city beyond the private program. Even though it's publicly accessible, a concert hall program is private in the sense that, you either have a ticket or you don't, and not everyone will necessarily have a ticket, right? So that the kind of series of spaces you make at the key connection points with the urban fabric are generous, are open, are inviting, are catalyzing hopefully something new and exciting as a component of that important square for the city. So I really appreciate that approach. I think it's a great insight to say that this kind of back courtyard on the west is a food square, that it has a clear identity, that it's about dining, it's about gathering, because there can be a kind of pitfall to this way of thinking about urban space as architects, where we just think that, oh, just more urban space is always better. But if it's not programmed intelligently or carefully, it could fail, right? There's many, many examples in the 20th century of modernist plazas that nobody occupied, right? And so thinking carefully about the connection to the city, about how it gets programmed, about the scale of it, about what is adjacent to and animates it, right? What feeds into it, all those things are super important. And I start to see that way of thinking in your project, which is really great. I would just make a couple of suggestions in regard to that issue, which is maybe one is where you have the coat check and sort of maybe it was the box office, I don't remember, on the other side of that quote unquote tunnel, the pass through on the other side from the amphitheater, feels to me like maybe not the right place for that. Like maybe I'd like to see a tenant space there, some sort, maybe a bar moves in, or maybe something public also animates that, so that both sides have publicly accessible programming that's not necessarily related to the concert hall. But like then, so then the question would be like, where do we go to actually get into the concert hall itself, to the lobby and ticket booth, etc. So maybe you're rethinking that relationship. And then I love the sort of, excavation of this public room in the amphitheater. I don't know what happens in the amphitheater or what we're looking at when we're coming down the steps. That may be something that could use a little bit more study. I don't know what, I think that like programmatically, whatever that is, I think is really key. I'm thinking of like some really cool sauna projects where they took a basketball kind of double height space for basketball and then sort of like half buried it. So you get this sort of like clerestory view from the city, but then you look down to an active program. So there's definitely ways to make that work and make it exciting, but how it gets programmed is an open question for me. The last comment I'll make is just in regard to the facade, actually, different subject. I like the sort of connection you're trying to make between the kind of diagrid geometries and the sort of profile of these gabled roofs and such. But for me, maybe the issue is how hierarchically the diagrid geometries of structure relate to what you showed as an orthogonal geometry of curtain wall and slab edge behind it. And it might be simply a question of how it was represented, the type of drawing that you used, where everything felt very flat. Like there was no hierarchy between the dominance, I would imagine the dominance of that diagrid and the sort of like, hopefully the visual suppression of that orthogonal, or maybe rethinking the curtain wall geometries to let them become a kind of diagrid mullion scheme, thinking about like a Seattle public library. Apparently I'm mentioning two major OMA projects today that were designed at the same time, where the whole sort of shroud or the wrapper is really a kind of diagrid geometry that feels more integral, and that everything behind is sort of like suppressed visually. So I don't know if that's something you had a chance to look at, or maybe if it wasn't, maybe I'd encourage you to think about a type of representation that allows you to explore those visual hierarchies a little bit more powerfully.
In regards to the facade, and I did try more following the shape of the diagrid with the windows. I just really like the contrast of the more rectangular behind the diagrid. I thought that it really helped sort of almost elongate the space and make it feel taller. And I thought that it was too busy when I tried it following the shape of the diagrid, and that it was like way too busy for the space and for the site. So I went with the more rectangular. I do agree that the coat check is a little off, like the placement is off, and that it would probably be better on the second floor where the concert attendees would go out. And I really like the idea that you said that that wall can also be for the public and have some public engagement. So thank you for your feedback.
Yeah, I want to underscore something that Brian was talking about is that because your project starts to touch on this, right? Is that this idea that, if you're designing a kind of a public space, that you're also considering those kinds of programs that help activate that space. And, if you look at public spaces that don't work, there are many reasons why they might not work. It might be that the scale of it is too big, or and then the kind of relationship to the kind of adjacent programs is not strong enough, or that there isn't any kind of adjacent program that activates that space. And so to kind of really consider then how you might kind of integrate those in a meaningful way in your work, I think is an important consideration. And so, yeah, and then, like Brian was pointing out, then you have to think about like, well, how do I get into the theater? If I'm going there as a concert goer, and I think that's kind of a wonderful problem to have to solve. Then it's like you start really thinking, then you start really parsing down to like, okay, let me think about how am I choreographing this kind of sequence, and that at some points it's actually okay that you don't have to keep them completely separate. Sometimes it's okay that they intersect. And so you have someone who's in black tie and a formal gown intersecting with somebody who's there just going to pick up, food and going to hang out in the food courtyard, and I think because that's what city life is, right? Is this kind of mixing, the genuine mix of all these different kinds of programs and uses. And I think that's what your project starts to, touch on and maybe becomes like kind of a representation of that. So it gets me thinking about some interesting things.
All right. Thank you guys so much for your feedback. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Okay, we have two more before we take another break. And this one, I don't think Gnaneshwari is here, and she's at a engagement party for her sister, so she can't even join via WebEx. So we will present her work, and then you guys can comment to her really for the recording in absentia, and then we'll go to the last project by Jacob. So, Matt, you want to take it?
Hi, my name is Gnaneshwari, and this is my design proposal for the Staromestske concept hall. My approach to the project was to create a series of separated and distinct spaces that were derived from the same formal language. The main program of the bar, lobby, and concert hall was pulled apart and pushed in response to the environmental context of Old Town Square. With Paraska Boulevard and the church being the most active in terms of pedestrian circulation, I wanted to funnel people off of the street into the building, both conceptually and formally, which resulted in the angling of the walls and the roof. This design proposal translates into architecture through the idea of compression and expansion. This main ground floor plan details the sequential ordering of the 3 volumes, which, when pulled away from each other, allows for the excess or in-between space to act as occupiable crochet, where egress and bathrooms are tucked away. The bar and the concert hall are sandwiched on either side of the main entrance that ramps up, while large seating-like stairs ripple down from St. Nicholas Church and also act as an extension of the square itself. After users go up the entrance, they unfold onto a bar where they can choose to enjoy a drink and sit at the loft and look out on the clock tower. The loft area of the bar and the mezzanine of the concert hall are on the same level, connected by a hallway. The basement plan shows the main entrance for performers, where private programs such as dressing rooms, guest suites, and offices are placed directly underneath the concert hall, while the rehearsal room is placed underneath a bar with access to outdoor seating for the public. These are renderings of views from the rehearsal room, as previously mentioned, from both the outside looking in and the inside looking out. It acts as an informal public performance space where viewers get a glimpse of the show they will see inside. This is the east elevation, where you can see the relationship between the church, clock tower, and the proposed concert hall in terms of height and slope. The angle of the ramp is also made visible from the exterior. When we cut a section through the main entrance, we begin to see some of the interior qualities of people slowly pushing in up this long ramp that compresses them into a transitional hallway. This is the west elevation. And in this section, you can see the relationship between the church stairs and the main stairs for the performers, as well as the interior of the concert hall. This is the north elevation, where you can see the effect of the entrance ramp from Paraska Boulevard. This section also reinforces the bar's relationship to the clock tower. Here's the south elevation, while this section shows the relationship between the bar and the concert hall. The building ultimately reads as a unified whole through the use of mirroring slopes and angles. Transparency was intentionally considered in relation to the site's views and programmatic function. The slope glazing on the roof of the bar was created in order to be able to look up and see the clock tower, while the curtain wall at the main entrance and the halves of each volume act as frames that invite you to look in. The facade system that was designed and applied is made up of ceramic rocks of 3 colors, red, blue, and yellow. These colors emerge from studying the context around the site of Prague's pastel-built environment. While the ordering of the colors are randomized, each volume will get a greater percentage of one, resulting in an overall tint seen from above. Here's an auto photo that showcases the 3 different colors. The structural system is precast concrete with typical steel framing. The ceramic rods are clad on the exterior, while a warmer wood cladding exists on the interior of the walls and floor. There are specific moments on the interior where the facade is seen, peeled, and wrapped around in various ways. Here we can see a detailed view of a section of the building where the facade is mimicked and reimagined as ceiling baffles in the concert hall, providing a visual and acoustic effect in the space. In the bar, you can see how the facade is seen on the interior wall and peels out onto the floor. This is a rendering of the concert hall entrance where you can see the colored tubes when light comes through. Here's a view of the entrance and the exterior at night. I'll end with a very short series of renderings that follow the narrative of how a user may experience the building. This is when you are in the entrance, ramping towards the hallway. Here they are at the bar, waiting for the concert to start, where they have a clear view of the clock tower to make sure that they are late. And here it ends with them at the show in the concert hall, enjoying their performance. Thank you.
Gnaneshwari, I just saw that you joined the event, so if you can turn on your camera, then you can be in dialogue with our critics.
Hi, unfortunately, I can't turn on my camera, but I am here. So if you have any questions or comments, I'd love to answer them.
Yeah, Gnaneshwari, one of the questions that I had is, it was interesting as I was watching the presentation, and this may be just my, maybe I zoned out for a moment, or maybe I just didn't understand the kind of building envelope as you were designing it. But my first thought was like, wow, like it just seems like it's so opaque. And I was in my mind formulating questions that I would have as like, how did you, what kind of directed you in that to make that decision where the facade was so opaque, but then being really specific about where you would have the openings with views to the clock tower and then from the bar, from the plaza, like into the bar. But then we got to the renderings towards the end, where then it appeared that, these ceramic tubes that had these different kind of pastels were actually luminous in a way that you could have light that, passes, from interior, to exterior and vice versa. Totally changed my reading of the whole project. It went from feeling like that it was very, opaque and heavy to now it feeling, really like drawing from the context in a really lovely, whimsical way, with the kind of patterning of the tubes, and that, just by altering and adjusting the kind of the relationship of those 3 colors, that it introduces this kind of dynamic quality to the facade. So I think that, one of the things that this is maybe more just as a something that I would offer you as a kind of a suggestion. When you present this project in your portfolio or in future presentations, I would encourage you to maybe start with that one image that shows it at night. Because like if you had started with that, I would have been all in from the very beginning, and because it was just such a magical view of the project that, that just changed the way that I thought about it. I don't know if Brian, if you had similar kind of feelings about it as I or not.
I did, yeah. Gnaneshwari, thank you for presenting that project. I mean, it's so interesting. I feel like there's a lot of really good things that you've got going on here, and I agree that I would even say, maybe I'll start with like how you present it also, because the perspective images from the interior, I think, like if you take the diagrams at the beginning and your conceptual intent, marry them immediately to the kind of experiential perspective images, so that somebody understands like what the payoff is, like what you're after. And also, like, even more importantly, like while you're working, so that you as a designer know what you're trying to achieve and where or not that can be strengthened. Because I think you started with kind of these are all the elevations, these are the plans and sections and such, kind of, you know, walking through the orthogonal drawings, and that's fine. But then we're as critics looking from the outside, viewers of your presentation, we're sort of like gathering our somehow maybe a misperception of your intent or what the effect is, because you don't control that by showing us this is what it looks like, this is what we're supposed to see. So maybe resequencing would be valuable. But I even think, like, I also really, I love that facade design actually. And if I understand it correctly, I took the same understanding as you, Julie, that I'm reading it, at least in that one perspective, it's you have a curtain wall in some way, and there's either a single or double layer of these ceramic elements that kind of shield the light, diffuse the light, and then pick up the color so that the light gets infused with these colors. That's amazing. And I think that what's so smart about that is that you can open the facade to view and light, but control it. But you can take the same system tectonically and clad the opaque surfaces of the building so that there's a kind of mystery and discovery in that. I think would be really exciting. So I think that's a really great system you've developed there. The thing that I'm missing, I guess, is more use of very specific apertures, like targeted views, openings at the human scale, or at least somewhat more speaking to the human scale, because there seems to be a strategy that you have of it's like giant building surface is either all opaque or all glass, right? All like skylight is all like the entire roof of the bar is skylight, so I can see the tower. But I'm almost more intrigued by the idea that they're, particularly this idea of funneling. You talked about funneling the occupant or the visitor into the entry, and you show us this long processional hallway. But immediately I'm thinking, well, what's at the end? I just see a blank wall and a turning of the corner. And it's going to be just sort of looking kind of awkwardly at the lower portion of an adjacent building in very narrow succession. But if there were somehow like a sort of aperture that we're lifting and peeling and directing light and view up to the tower, or there was sort of more control about, you know, what are we seeing when we're directed in certain ways? Or when we get to the bar, that there's this kind of monitor skylight or something that from a particular angle sets up this dramatic clock tower view. So I think there's an in-between scale of opening that you could explore that would, I think, really strengthen the project.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, it's and you know, going back to that one view when it showed it at that kind of night view, there was kind of like there was a nuance, you know, to it that suddenly I understood, like, wow, something that I had thought I understood as being opaque was actually, you know, luminous and translucent in some way, carry of light. And you know, and so I think that I felt the same way as Brian about you know, the big kind of skylight roof over the bar. I found myself wishing, like, oh, I wish that, you know, maybe there could have been an opportunity to kind of you know, maybe calibrate that, you know, so it's not just like just this big, you know, I don't know what system that would be, but I started thinking, like, wow, like how much light is going to come in, you know, through there. Like, yeah, I can see the clock tower, but there's like, you know, I can see it from wherever I am. And so I think you know, it's, you know, kind of issues of similar issues that I've brought up previously, which I know you haven't been able to join us until now. But I've talked about issues of scale, and Brian speaking about that too, this kind of like this middle scale that I think, you know, starts to, you know, break it down from kind of the bigger moves that you've made, but then started thinking it down to like, how does it speak to the body and how do we inhabit that space? I think that the other thing too is the drawings. You know, oftentimes, you know, we get caught by, you know, when I say like, well, we need to show a site plan, we need to show elevations and sections and floor plans. But I think one of the things that as the drawings are our language, right? They're how we communicate. And I think there's an opportunity for the drawings then to be carriers of our intentions. And so while, yes, you must have those plans and sections and elevations to help, you know, help us understand like what the proposal is, always kind of think to yourself, like, what kind of elevation or what do I need to show in the floor plan? So for instance, I feel like that in your project, this kind of sequence of movement was pretty important. You talked about this kind of this long ramp that kind of pulls us through the building. And so I think that your floor plan drawings or even your sections could be ways that kind of highlight that, So how does the drawing serve to kind of I guess, as a propositional device, that shows the viewer, like, here's how you're imagining the space is being used or being occupied or being inhabited. And it's made possible precisely because of the architectural language, the spatial tectonic language that, you've kind of introduced into the type of the drawing that you've done. I mean, I can say that for almost everyone that we've been speaking to, but for yours, it seems like it really comes very much to the foreground based on the kind of line of this discussion right now.
Darius, if I could just add one quick comment to finish. I really think that also my favorite part of your project is the sunken practice room. There's at the square. I love that, but also same thing, like for your portfolio, render that. Show the activity of the concert, of the orchestra practicing and people peering down from the square. Fantastic urbanistic moment there.
Yep.
Gnaneshwari, a quick comment as a rejoinder, or are you satisfied?
I definitely think that there were definitely things that I could have improved on, especially with the drawings, going back to the comment of drawings, and things that I wanted to show. But I do think that with like the amount of program and restrictions that we had with this project, I liked kind of like focusing on moments and areas where I could really push the project. But thank you so much for your comments.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have one more, Jacob Pensinson, and then we'll take a break. And then we'll go through 3 more projects and we can have a little general comment discussion. You ready, Matt?
Hello, my name is Jacob Pensinson, and I'm here with the proposed design for the Staromestske Concert Hall in Prague's Old Town Square. The project's title, Spinny, refers to the original conception of the design process, in which the aspirations included the hybridization of an indoor greenhouse and a concert hall. Its goal in bringing back nature to the city and embracing the current site condition as a green space. The design was initiated as an attempt to integrate a concert hall with an indoor botanical garden. The program was arranged so that the main theater would stretch up over the tree line and above all other programming on the site. The footprint of the building was intended to act as a funnel, drawing the public into the central courtyard as a means of insinuating a path of entrance. Wayfinding elements in the form of animal statues would further invite participants onto the site, engaging with it and recognizing it as a continuation of the plaza and the boulevard. The program became more clearly subdivided across the building's plan. The main theater would fall center stage and be flanked either side with a public program on the south end and private on the north end. The separation would be continued throughout each wing of the building. As the form developed on the exterior, a trellis system developed on the facade, allowing plants to grow on the building, falling back to the original concept of a greenhouse. As the project developed its own identity, trellis facades continued over the entire building, allowing vegetation to grow everywhere, and an inner glass facade enables both the transmittance of natural light into the main theater space, as well as visual transmittance of facade detailing from the rear buildings through the glazing. The architecturally formal concepts take inspiration from the gabled roofs, as is designed by taking a single sheet of material and folding it at similar angles to produce a roofscape that helps subdivide the program through the building and help develop a hierarchy across the site. Here we can see how those elements combine: the roof, the trusses, and curtain wall, and all other elements of the building from the CL2 floor plates to the points of primary circulation. When dividing the site between public and private, it was important to produce visual hierarchy, while also hierarchy that respects the site relations and surrounding context. Its general form tries to embed itself into the surrounding context, as well as producing a modern piece of an object that helps complete the plaza's form creating methods of directing foot traffic across the site, continuing the boulevard as a footpath into the site, and providing purpose in traveling behind the site, creating moments of removal such as isolation from the busy plaza. In addition, the sloped nature of the design promotes a visual connection with the St. Nicholas Church from the plaza, as if bowing to present itself. Again, the mass slopes upwards towards the clock tower, producing a dynamism across the site. The internal programming arrangement is designed to separate public and private, while still providing small passages across the facade, where tenants and private members of the building can have access across the site internally. As visitors enter the building from the south side, they are greeted by the tall atrium space that piers on the interior, sloping as the gable roof does, allowing visitors to view each of the levels and providing a sense of grandeur on the interior, as well as providing isolation from the busy plaza. Low grade exists the bar that is also accessible to the public. Traveling up the main stair to the second level, reaching towards the top of the tree line on the left through the windows. Visitors can travel to the entrance of the theater. From there, they can travel down and find their seats. The interior of the theater is almost religious, with a vertical segmented glazing that allows natural light to enter the space and create an impressive sense of scale. In detail, we can see how vertical levers can be used to regulate light entering the theater, as well as acting as sound dampening. The private side of the building offices are most accessible on the lower level, while on the upper level is the rehearsal spaces, giving the extended heights and privacy from the lower level. Visually, natural light floods the space while separating from the busy lower levels of the public eye. This architecture design takes total consideration of the user group, while also making specific considerations for the surrounding context. Here we can see a detail of the exterior envelope from the rectangular tube steel that makes up the trellises, curtain walls, a cable-strung back is supported from the trusses that spans the roofs, holding up the CLT catwalks that run across the facade. Timber construction is used through a large portion of the floor and truss fans, but CMU is used to acoustically isolate the theater from the exterior as both a mass and a shear wall. Here we're able to see the general structure, including the spanning heavy timber girders and scissor trusses, as well as the use of footing that parallels this foundation. In section, we can see the catwalks are able to peer into the theater when the louvers are open, as well as providing a point of transmittance to the exterior. The building uses a heat pump system and geothermal valves as the HVAC system to the building. You can see how it generally works for the building through this diagram. Lastly, we can look through a model series of how the building appears. Here we can see how the animal statues guide the eye onto the site and how the building embeds itself into the trees. Here we can see the public wing as the building and how circulation can move across, as well as the covered walkways on the bottom left that also allows visitors to both see into the building as well as travel to the rear structure garden. Then here we can see how the general form slopes across the site and how the roofscape appears as this continuous series of gables that unify the roof hall, in addition to the rear facades being transmitted through the building, retaining that attachment to existing architecture and the surrounding context. Here we can see the supports that come out to hold up the trellised overhang, as well as the catwalks that move across the facade and help separate the interior. Another perspective is the south face, where the circulation can once again be seen moving across the facade. I thank you for listening to my presentation for Splenique, a proposal for a concert hall in Prague.
Oh, we got some clapping here.
Is Jacob with us
I'll
in
let you
person?
guys start your commentary. Here's Jacob.
Hello. Hi, Jacob. I really enjoy the project's use of the greenhouse idea. And I really appreciated the orthogonal drawings. The technical drawings were beautifully executed, really nicely done. I have a few questions about how the project is developed. I guess maybe I'd love to hear your response. So I'm trying to understand on one level the use of the greenhouse idea, where it's a metaphor and where it's actually materialized. It didn't seem to me that there's actually any trees or plants inside, like there's no winter garden inside the building. Instead, you suggested there was a trellis like the facade was somehow trellis. Okay. Um, so that was one question, and the other question is, I don't think it's possible that I lost focus for a moment and missed it, but I didn't understand the structure, the roof structure. There were lots of views of the models where it looked, or the drawings where it looked very thin up on top, and the spans are quite large. And I saw, mostly the roof was or entirely opaque, and I'm trying to understand how that's structured. I did see in your final image, I guess it was your first image as well, in the photo montage, it looked like there was some large timber trusses or something. So maybe they weren't represented everywhere. So I guess, yeah, I'm trying to understand the structure, and then I'm trying to understand how you deploy the greenhouse idea.
Do I unmute? Okay,
You
now
are.
I'm unmuted.
Yep.
So the best way, okay, let's do the second question first in regard to the structure. I went with relatively heavy timber construction using glulam columns and heavy timber trusses that ran across, almost creating a little bit. The original idea behind the roof structure was actually to create a bit of a space frame or like a tabletop in terms of how it would be supporting the roof structure, because it does span quite the distance and it is mimicking the gabled roofs around. So that's why I employed the use of scissor trusses, while also using girders in the opposing direction perpendicular. And so overall, minus the trusses on the exterior, which would be extruded aluminum, these interior structure would be heavy timber construction. There was a series of also use of CLT plates that were sitting on beams spanning across the laminated columns.
Some of the trusses in the photo montage seem to be going the long direction of the hall. Is that so? You're spanning the long direction instead of spanning the short direction?
They're in both directions, essentially having scissor trusses following in the direction of the roofscape, but then having girders follow along the opposite or the perpendicular direction.
Okay. I have some other thoughts, but I'll let Julie jump in if she wants to.
Yeah, I really appreciated the kind of elegance of your drawings as well. I mean, it was they were just really conceptually rich, but then also tectonically legible. So I think that there was this kind of I really understood, how I might be to occupy those spaces. I also really appreciated you montaging your proposal directly into the photograph of the context. I mean, that just made it like very believable to me, like as if, like I was I could definitely imagine it, in that space. Your project raises kind of questions to me of, let's see, I have a bunch of different thoughts going through my mind. Let's see if I can try to organize them in a way. I had a similar question to Brian about the greenhouse, but then in the end, I was kind of happy that it didn't result in a winter garden on the interior, but more that, I began to understand this more kind of logic of the kind of the filigree of the kind of building envelope. It was like this idea of this building wrapper that then really served as kind of a way of just kind of containing like all the various programs on the inside. And that, from what I understood, it seemed that you were looking for ways that you were taking what looked to be very thin and, kind of thinking about like, how do we make that habitable? Like this kind of catwalk space where I could both participate with kind of visual connection to the exterior, but then also at times I could look into the performance space as well. And I thought that was kind of a really interesting kind of a play. And so I found myself as you were going through your project, looking for other places that might come to bear. Like it makes sense that it happens there between the performance space and the catwalk and the exterior envelope. But were there other spaces, where those kinds of, I guess, kind of borrowed views, like where I could like visually eavesdrop, on another space. I'm not in a creepy way, but just kind of understand the kind of, maybe like there's with the practice rooms, or looking at the kind of space between a foyer and a kind of a cafe, or kind of a social space. And so that those kinds of pockets, and I guess that kind of gets me to this issue of scale. I think, first of all, I mean, there was a lot that you accomplished a tremendous amount in this project. Very clear, very easy to understand. And so of course it means that, I'm going to ask for more. So if you had another 2 weeks, what are other things that, you might want to integrate into the project? And I think that, I want to go back to something that I talked about in the previous proposal, this idea of the role of the drawings as kind of propositional devices. And so I find myself, wondering, if you were to say, I'm going to pick, three kind of really poignant moments, in this overall project, and use the drawing as a way to kind of illustrate, the kind of the life, how the architecture sponsors and activates a particular kind of life, at this moment in the day, this time of the year, this day of the week, how might the space then, in a way, it kind of it lives out the kind of proposition that you've made, that the building itself almost in a way falls to the background, but then allows the kind of the life of the performance or of the city and the social life being to play out against this backdrop. That, those are some of the things that your project peaks in my mind. And so I think it's, it's pretty wonderful, that it gets me thinking about that and the kind of role that architecture can play in sponsoring these kinds of social acts, of conviviality and camaraderie and all of that.
Thank you.
Jacob, just a couple additional thoughts. I think that coming back to sort of the initial question about the greenhouse, I guess for me, where you lose me is the trellis on the facade. It just seems like it's not necessary. And if you're really interested in incorporating the vegetation as a link to the park that's currently there, then I guess I would either lose it altogether and say you landed, whatever your process is, you landed on the sort of language, architectural, tectonic language of the greenhouse, and just because it's appealing to you, you develop that, and it's not about the plantings, then that's fine. It becomes the architectural language. But if it is important to have the landscape, I would suggest that maybe the winter garden could be part of it. Maybe it is that the lobby, because I guess it could be a kind of transition where you have this edge of landscape on the exterior, you have these animal sculptures. There's this kind of whimsy and imagination there, that there's something, I'm looking for a transition that connects. So it's not just we go through the door and now we're inside and all of that ends. I guess maybe I'd just like to see that blur across the envelope of the building. And I feel like that multi-story lobby and circulation space is loose enough that it could incorporate some of this as a kind of sort of a winter garden. So, but I just think that technically the height of those facades, the idea of the trellis, it's just too fussy and technically difficult to execute, and you're setting yourself up for problems there. What I would rather see is just an acknowledgement, again, that you have to screen the daylight that's coming in, at least on certain faces of that building, and to develop the requisite tectonic strategy of louvers or screening elements, or maybe a third layer. I mean, again, like this, you have the layer of the concert hall enclosure, then you have the layer of the glass curtain wall. Maybe there's another layer that's occupiable of screening elements or something that sort of let you occupy that threshold of space between the interior and the exterior, between the private interior of the space, the concert hall, and the public space of the plaza, within the architecture even, I think. But these are just the sort of main things I'm thinking about when I look at your project. But it's a beautifully represented and very, very compelling project.
Thank you. I'm actually wondering if I could somewhat respond to the idea of a sort of second element or a tertiary element. Yeah, very good. You guys can hear me, right?
Yep.
Is the idea that as a trellis,
allowing greenery to grow on the exterior of the building could in turn become that tertiary element on the exterior as the plants grow higher and sort of acting as the shading element in the winter as they become to be brown and die a little bit more. That would enable light to enter the space, and that would be somewhat of a lighting control, but as sort of the transitory element between the exterior and the interior, as the walls on the interior are its curtain walls and then the trellis, there's always this visual connection with sort of being surrounded by the greenery, sort of being within the forest. And that's sort of why I wanted to maintain this idea of a greenhouse, the use of curtain wall, and enabling at least the feeling of being within greenery, rather than being completely separated from it.
But, to which I can say fair enough. So then if that's the case, then let's see, and again, maybe I missed it, but let's see because of the nature of the studio, you have to actually resolve these ideas and show how they get executed, right? So let's see the planter boxes at multiple stories that suggest that, a vine can't grow 40 feet high, or the irrigation systems that support it, the access for people to maintain the plantings and to address, things that have died. And so like, how do you provide all of those systems? So it's not just a kind of magical thinking like, oh, the plants grow up and it's perfect, right?
Yeah, and I think that, if you were to, because I was thinking the same thing, Brian, as you were talking, Jacob. I was like, wow, I was like, thinking about the maintenance of that, and how would that actually work? And so I think that, if there's something, very, your facade as it's developed right now is very light, right? Very skeletal, and you see the people kind of walking behind it and such, that I start to worry, I guess, that if you were to play it out, or maybe this would come out just naturally, say like, oh wow, like suddenly this kind of aim of having the kind of greenery grow up is a kind of a romantic notion. It doesn't actually work, which would then kind of force you into making a decision about like, okay, if it is really still important to me, how do I still incorporate it, but maybe it's more nuanced in these particular areas, and that it's not just something that goes like from one end all the way to the other, from ground all the way to the sky. So it actually could be helpful for you as you kind of resolve those, those kinds of considerations.
Or maybe recognizing that you have sculptures of deer in the plaza, not actual deer, right? That maybe the facade develops a kind of ornamentation strategy that's sort of evocative of vines or plants growing on the facade, but not actually plants. Just a provocation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've got a 20-minute break and then 3 more projects. The urban design projects have materialized, so we'll see those. And then we've got 20 minutes for closing comments, and then we'll adjourn at 5. I have a hard stop at 5, so we really have to take it from there. So let's take a break. We'll see you back in 20 minutes at 3:40.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
So this is simply a schedule announcement. We're moving to the graduate studio, so there are 3. 2 are the sort of intro to advanced, so it's the same Prague project, same exact program at the graduate level. And then the final project we'll look at is a graduate studio in our urban design program, which graduate students can take in their 3rd year. That's their more expansive studio. And that will be, that's more of a kind of a regional planning project, and the students will be here to respond. So we'll go through those, and then leaves us about 20 minutes for some general overall comments about what you think about the whole kind of, upper level studios together, what works, what doesn't. All right, so you guys ready? Okay, Matt?
My name's Libby, and I will be presenting my proposal for the Old Town Square Concert Hall located in Prague. My intention for this project was to create a contemporary work of architecture that would not overwhelm or diminish the value of its historical context. That being said, this project can be considered architecture because of its acknowledgement of time and place, which the following drawings and diagrams will demonstrate. I will begin by showing the roof plan of my building in the context of the site. The The notable landmarks adjacent to the site are labeled and include St. Nicholas Church and Paris Boulevard to the north, Old Town Square to the east, and the Clock Tower to the south. The ground floor of my building includes public front of house, commercial, and private back of house program, represented on this plan and in the remainder of the presentation by the colors blue, purple, and pink, respectively. The two front of house entrances indicated by blue arrows are intended for concertgoers and are located at the heavily traveled north end of the site, one adjacent to St. Nicholas and one at the intersection of Paris Boulevard and Old Town Square, illustrated in this image. The commercial entrance, indicated by the purple arrow, is located at the center of the site, adjacent to Old Town Square, illustrated in this image. And the back of house entrance, indicated by the pink arrow, is intended for musicians and staff, and is located at the rear of the site, adjacent to a smaller, secluded square, illustrated in this image. These exploded axonometric diagrams show the ground floor in the context of the entire building. The basement is located below grade and contains commercial and back of house program. The second and third floors contain front of house and back of house program, as well as the concert hall volume, represented in orange. The partee on the left explains how the concert hall sits in the center of the second and third floors, and how the supporting front of house and back of house programs wrap around the rectangular mass. This concept of the wrapped concert hall is also illustrated by the second and third floor plans. Highlighted in green, the architectural stair in the north corner and the pair of elevators in the northwest corner bring visitors from the ground floor lobby to the second and third floors, where they can access the orchestra and balcony levels of the concert hall, respectively. This rendering shows the ground floor lobby and the architectural stair that leads to the second floor orchestra level and the third floor balcony level. This longitudinal section through the concert hall shows its location relative to the rest of the building. Similarly, the left cross-section through the concert hall, looking towards the clock tower, shows the stage and the raised choir loft. The right section, looking towards St. Nicholas, shows the orchestra and balcony levels. Additional spaces of significance include the bars, located on the second and third floors, and the terrace, located on the second floor. In these spaces, people can congregate and socialize during intermissions and after shows. The slender columns at the perimeter of the terrace create the east facade of the building, facing Old Town Square. This contemporary colonnade continues to wrap around to the north facade of the building, facing St. Nicholas Church. The east and north sides of the building are the facades visitors see as they approach it, from Old Town Square or from St. Nicholas. The west facade and the south facade are less prominent, as they are abutting adjacent buildings. As an attempt to maintain a sense of place, my facade design was derived from the surrounding architecture. The west facade's fenestration is grouped in pairs, mimicking the facade of the building it faces. The concert hall's hip roof preserves the integrity of the skyline, and the colonnade that wraps the east and north elevations mirrors the vertical rhythm established by the facades around the perimeter of Old Town Square. Similarly, my building's materials were inspired by the surroundings. Slate shingles for the roof, precast brick panels for the exterior walls, limestone for the colonnade and the spandrels, and checkerboard pavers for the immediate outdoor spaces. This 3D section shows the relationship between the exterior and the interior of the building. The lobby is entered at the ground level via the plinth that accommodates the sloping site. The orchestra is entered via the second level, and the balconies are entered via the third level. The bars are accessible from both orchestra and balcony seating, and the terrace overlooking Old Town Square is accessible from the second level. The steel frame structure and the envelope are detailed in the following drawings. The beams and girders are concealed in the space between the floor slab and the suspended ceiling. Similarly, the interior and exterior columns are concealed in stone veneer. The envelope consists of brick panels and transparent glazing, and the horizontal spandrel condition is indicated by stone veneer and back-painted glazing. This 3D section shows the relationship between the performance space and the surrounding spaces. The roof of the concert hall is supported by long-span Pratt trusses, which are visually hidden and acoustically isolated by the suspended sound clouds. The narrow buffer zone between the concert hall and the rest of the building prevents unwanted noise and light from entering the space during performances. This buffer zone is highlighted orange in the following 2D section. Highlighted green is the structural connection where the concert hall meets the rest of the building. In place of a ridged connection is a neoprene pad that separates the beam and the column in order to prevent unwanted vibrations transferring from the surrounding space to the performance space. And finally, the following slides show my physical model in the context of the site. Thank you.
Okay.
You prefer to go by Libby or Elizabeth?
Either is fine. I can go by Libby.
Okay. I guess a question that I have for you, thank you so much for sharing your presentation. It was easy for me to follow along and to understand some of the decisions that you made as you went through. I guess I want to start with, you know, your project, and I've talked about this in previous projects, this idea of, you know, asking this question, what does it mean to be contextual? And in yours, you know, I see that, you've identified, the particular kind of shingle, facade articulation. You've looked at, windows and started and considered how to incorporate those into the proposal, for your project. I think, when you look at reasons why particular materials were used or particular kind of massings, played out, they're for reasons that might be related to the kind of technology of the time, particular kind of program, even thinking about, the type of fenestration that might be, like a window that opens at the top and the bottom that, helps encourage a kind of ventilation in that way, which, now today, isn't needed since we have, more advanced, kind of systems. And so the question that I have for you is, as you were thinking about how to integrate those into your own proposal, what were some of the questions that or not questions, but what were some of the guidelines that maybe you set for yourself as you considered ways to integrate like particular kind of, roof profiles or even, the kind of the column, the colonnade or the facade, so that in the end that they were more thoughtfully integrated and it wasn't just kind of like a copy paste kind of thing. I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit more about your thought process behind that.
Sure. So my intention with using the context as something to inform the material decisions and, for example, the roof shingles or the brick paneling on the exterior walls, I think the difference between just doing a copy and paste was, for example, rather than having a load-bearing structure with the bricks, it's a steel frame that uses a more modern technology like a brick paneling system that can be modular and then placed on the facade as needed. And then another thing with the columns and the rhythm of the facade, instead of, again, it being more of a heavy structure similar to the rest of the surrounding buildings, I tried to make it more of a light concept with the steel structure and then taking the different elements of the surroundings and then applying it in a way that technology can now do in the more contemporary era of architecture.
What's the spacing of your columns?
15 feet.
15 feet. Okay. Because it feels, so it's interesting to hear you describe it. So as you're describing, I'm like, okay, like you see me nodding my head, like I understand kind of the thought process and the logic behind it. But then let's talk about the column structure for a moment, because when you refer to that as being a lighter kind of structural system, or kind of like lighter kind of articulation, it actually feels really heavy to me. And I think it has to do with the spacing of it. I mean, every 15 feet, if you have, steel kind of, stone clad, it ends up feeling, much heavier, so I wondered, if there, some of the, and getting the kind of dimensional order, the kind of rhythm set is like that in itself is its own kind of study. And so to say like, so, well, is it, every 30 feet, or is it a 45 foot, or is it, what might make the most sense? And that might be another way that you might look at kind of particular kind of rhythm, or the kind of cadence, of kind of solid to void that's evident, in the surrounding fabric. But then also knowing, keeping in your mind that if you have a facade that's, a bearing wall, that the kind of solid to void relationship is going to be very different than one that's, a skeletal kind of, system. So I think, how you begin to kind of then import like your own understanding of the differences between those, I think can helps kind of refine the kind of the process of, that kind of articulation. I'm talking specifically about the columns, now in the facade.
Hi, Libby. Yes, thank you again for sharing your presentation. I really enjoyed seeing it, and agree with Julie that it was extremely clear and easy to follow along and understand the project, how it's laid out, how it's put together, the different aspects of it. So I give you congratulations on all of that. I think it's clear that the idea of contextualism is the sort of big conversation topic here in your proposal. And I guess the way that I would maybe like to move that conversation forward a little bit is, or just add to that conversation, is to think about some of the choices, I guess, that we would make as architects. It's completely valid to say that we're doing X, doing Y, doing Z to create a kind of mimicry or a kind of reciprocity with a kind of visual contextualism. But I think I would encourage you to do sort of maybe two things when you think about that kind of contextualism. One is to think about, is it only visual contextualism that you're focused on, or are there other kinds of contextualism that we could think about, right? We could do a deep dive into what are the programs of all of the adjacent spaces, adjacent projects. How do people come and go from that square? What are the time of day operation concerns of the businesses around? Like, when are people present? When are they not present? And how might that influence who would potentially use the spaces of the concert hall? And so there could be a kind of programmatic response, let's just say, and a sort of urbanist response that we've seen in a number of projects so far this afternoon, that are trying to kind of be open and generous in their way of inviting people that are maybe not even sort of concert goers into the building, and providing spaces for those kinds of activities and those kinds of patrons. And so that might be something interesting, because it might also, and the reason I say that is because typologically you've taken a very classical approach to how you lay out and program the concert hall. And I know that the program was given, but I think it's always important for us as architects to question or challenge that program, particularly when site is so important like this, right? So, if we had the benefit or the luxury of having a kind of external consultant of a, sort of someone from the concert hall organization who could talk about their programming ambitions, it would be common in this country to find an arts organization that says, we're not getting enough revenue from just selling tickets. We need other revenue generators. We need commercial spaces. We need activity. We need people to come in and use this building to patronize our food establishments or whatever it might be. We need synergies between other arts organizations that might start to add other spaces, or change the nature of how the spaces you have work. that might start to challenge the typology even. So like, if all of that is a lot of ways of saying like there can be drivers that sort of challenge the typological clarity of the sort of classical model that you use. And then the point is like, what do you do as an architect if you have a conflict between a desire to be contextual or traditional in terms of a typological layout, right? And then something that's coming in that's brand new that doesn't fit well with that, right? And it might be that you can resolve that tension, but this is just one example, because we can also talk about, for me, the thing that's challenging about your proposal is that you constrain on all variables in terms of like the roof profile is traditional, the floor plan is traditional, the arcade is traditional, the materiality is traditional, like so every piece and part. So then what you do as an architect is you constrain yourself from being able to respond to some of these sort of like contemporary inputs that pollute the clarity of that historic model. Does that make sense? And so I think that's not to say, this is Brian saying, don't be contextual, but to be careful and precise about like the way in which you want to be contextual, which variables you constrain and which ones you open up, so that maybe it is that material, but it gets used in a totally different way, because that arcade, seems to me you have that bearing wall behind which could support the roof trusses, and that arcade can be so much lighter and much more open and sort of responding to a different building technology. So that's just one example. Or that base, I'm thinking about the arcade, the way it's the same depth and the same height, even though this plaza is sloping against it, right? So how do you address accessibility to that edge? And so all these things that start to kind of push against that desired clarity, how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, if I could just jump, I know Darius, is there something we have to move on, but just really quickly, because I think that you know, one of the things that ends up happening is if with the kind of determination, you know, to bring all the various kind of components that are borrowed from the adjacent context into this project, some things that they just don't quite fit just right. So there ends up being this kind of like awkwardness of how the roof kind of sits on top of the kind of the body of the building, and how the columns and their relationship, you know, to the roof and then to the ground. And so each of these things on their own may have been and may actually be kind of worthy and appropriate kind of components to kind of integrate into the proposal. But when they start to all come together in a way, it ends up being these kind of weird kind of relationships, you know, and kind of frictions start to get set up. And so I find myself wondering, like, you know, if again, the, you know, the proverbial, if you had another 2 weeks, and if you were asked like, okay, like what are the, you know, the two components that are like really important that need to stay in there, and the other pieces that can you let go and you introduce other kinds of ways of articulating and developing the proposal, it'd be interesting to see what you would have done, you know, where it would move forward. And so now, knowing that this is last semester and you're moving forward, I think that if you're interested in this kind of way of working, I think the part of it is, you know, looking at other precedents and how others have done it well, and understanding that there has to be a kind of a hierarchy, you know, of, you know, things that get brought into the project, and that, you know, and then also understanding the technology of today and how that might play out. So, but I mean, these are interesting and tough questions that you'll carry on probably, you know, throughout your career.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so one more concert hall.
Good afternoon, I'm Nirmal Tiagarajan, proposing the design for the Shaded Theater in Prague's Old Town, Czech Republic. The conceptual sketch integrates the light architectural expression, making the building transparent to allow natural light to reach all of the rooms. The building concept is inspired by the Tipu Sultan's Summer Palace in Mysore. By preserving the building's heights and outside finishes and creating Gothic-style recessed flooring, the architectural design enables the building to connect its exterior and inside with a translucent enclosure. The massing of the whole is perpendicular to the orientation of the surroundings and the square. The exterior design is based on the current urban circumstances of the surrounding area and retains the majority of the site's public activities. The structure is meant to get more light from the north and is more exposed to the east. Most of the day, the structure is shadowed due to its surroundings. The architecture of parametric curtain walls was inspired by Gothic draperies for the elevation and musical notes for the plan view, with the movement of the structure depending on the wind flowing by the building. The recessed lobby level plan serves as the primary public entrance leading to the other floors of the house. The entry courtyard is planned for ADA movement and public waiting prior to ticket check-in. The back of the house has a rehearsal hall, and the HVAC room in the center of the building facilitates the simple duct distribution to all areas of the structure. The house-level floor plan has a seating capacity of 570 and is equipped with 6 ADA seats from all perspectives of the stage, as well as wheelchair access. Back of the house with musician entrance, dressing, and lounges. The loading deck's hydraulic lift facilitates the moving of instruments to different levels. The balcony level floor contains 120 seats and 2 ADA seats. The rear of the building has a choir loft, guest suites and lounges, as well as director and manager rooms. Based on the topography of the site, a distinction is maintained for the entry and exit locations. The roof level planned with musician courtyards and public courtyards, along with OHU units. The east elevation, viewed from the square, is meant to complement the neighboring sloping roofs. The western elevation. The south elevation. North elevation. The elevation indicates that the curtain structure serves as walls, windows, porticos, parapet roofs, and sunshades on various levels and sides of the structure. As the core component of the design, the longitudinal sections of all 3 building portions indicate the different level changes depending on the movement inside of the house. The transverse section runs through the house's rear. The section that passes through the house. The architecture of the stage's back is based on the idea of sound vibrations, with CLT functioning as diffusers and reflectors for the stage and as a parapet for the square loft. The section includes the lobby and entering the corridor. The primary constructions are concrete and wood glulam columns directly superimposed on concrete bases. To retain the interior finishes, the concrete columns and beams are extended to the top wherever curtain walls needed to be supported and finished with wood. The exploded axonometric image described the building's functional theme. The different components of the building's architecture, including the wood and stucco finishes, and roof's parametric construction. The mechanical diagram states the essential ducts allowed for the mechanical movement from the HVAC system to various areas of the structure. The space between the house floor and the dead vent theater wall provides support for the theater's radiative heating and cooling system. The next diagram illustrates the positioning of exits and life safety systems. The circulation diagram of building users across the building's various areas. The design of the emergency route is based on circulation movement. The minimum escape distance is 30 feet, and the maximum is 87 feet. The wall section describes various wall details. The roof is insulated with mineral wool and steel panel for the exterior to maintain the roof's parametric shape, curtain wall connectors to the translucent tempered glass, the theater's dead vent wall system, and floor detail. Next comes the view of the entrance courtyards. View of the Mikulski courtyard. Inside the house view from the balcony. View of Nicholas Church courtyard. View from the entrance of Nicholas Church. View from the street of the square. View from the side of the church. House level lobby view that demonstrates the visual connectivity with the church. The entry lobby and coat check view. The view of the house from the stage. The roof opening is slanted to prevent glare from reaching the stage and only permits light to enter over the seating of the house. When it is necessary to close the opening, the mechanical shutter is utilized. The perspective from the choir loft. Views of the Mikulski courtyard. Aerial perspectives. Views from physical models. Thank you.
Well, maybe that's the first question I would ask then is, what is the material of the sails?
Material of, I get it.
The material, the sails, the kind of swoopy exterior envelope.
So the materials were glass with steel as the mullions for it.
Okay.
It's a double glass, e-glasses.
Okay, so they're glass.
Yeah.
Okay.
So does that mean you have two glazing systems on the exterior? You have a kind of conventional vertical curtain wall, and then you have a double glass kind of curving sail.
No, it's like the steel mullions actually covering as a frame. Over that, I'm just framing the fixing the glasses. It's like a double glasses. So it's going to be thickness of something might be less than a 1 inch something.
So it's glass. That's a swoopy, and then that's on a frame, and then there is the vertical.
Yeah, it's going to be like 2 feet into 2 feet glasses. So it's been fixed with each like a grid.
Okay, I think I
And we would
understand.
see through, and then we would see through the glass into the opaque wall of the concert hall. Is this correct?
No, glass is actually a translucent glass. It's going to be the wall for the public areas. It's not going to be the wall for the concert hall. The concert hall is like it's in the center. The glasses is going to be in the wall of the public corridors and the lobby space. And at the back side, it's only going to be the canopy for the open terrace for the guest rooms. Other than that, the curtain wall is not there, and it's only going to be like a parapet for the top roof level courtyards. That's it. For the concert hall, it will be closed.
Okay, I mean, I think what I can respond to based on what we saw, Nimarajan, is the dynamism is clearly very powerful. Like this kind of very sculptural, energetic form making, reminiscent of what Frank Gehry tries to do, right? Which he's often taking the same approach, which is creating a very kind of utilitarian, solid box at the center for the concert hall, and then layering it outside of that box with a series of kind of dynamic forms, right? That don't fully close the envelope, right? They're kind of floating elements, and there's sort of gaps in between that get filled in with another cladding system or curtain wall system of some sort. So it gives you, I think what that gives you, besides a kind of sculptural appeal, right, a visual interest, is it gives you the potential to break out of the staticness of this box and, in my view, engage the surrounding context in dynamic ways, in responsive ways. And so one question I had about your scheme is you have 4 very different sides in terms of how this building engages the context. And I wasn't exactly clear on how you were letting those moves of the formal moves address the urban space differently, let's say on the church side on the north, or the square side on the east, in relation to the sort of tight adjacent building conditions on the south or partially in the west. So I think there was opportunity, in my view, to sort of loosen up or let some of these glass sails fly a bit more free, if you will, to maybe create big canopies or create covered plazas or sort of spaces that draw people from the city into the zone of the building even before they get in the door. Maybe there are spaces to just sit under cover and enjoy the parks you've created, enjoy the seating areas where we're undercover but not yet in the building. So kind of like pushing that threshold condition a little bit more, amplifying it, I think would be an interesting potential for your scheme.
Yeah, I appreciated the playfulness of the proposal, as well. And as and obviously, I had this question about what the material was. I I have to say, I wish you hadn't said they were glass because the way that it was presented, in my mind, I was imagining that they were some sort of, tensile kind of fabric or something much very light, and that it was a proposition to kind of introduce shading devices that, you know, that could offer kind of light that could come through, still offer views. And I think, like, I thought that's where you were going with it. And some of the images that you showed suggested that, but then others suggested it was something else. And that's why I asked the question. But I totally agree with Brian's, comments. I think that, that there's an opportunity to kind of really to be considerate of orientation and kind of the publicity or the privacy, of the facade, and so how do you then, take that kind of language and modulate it so that it makes sense, so that is there, and again, since we didn't see the plan, I'm not sure if there's like a separate entrance that you imagine like for the performers, there's another entrance, more for the public. Were there other kind of programs that you had thought to introduce, as well, that were those for those people who might come that are not going to a concert, but maybe just getting, a glass of wine, or they're getting a cup of coffee, or, a sandwich, or, whatever that might be. And so I think that those are all kind of opportunities to kind of, that helps introduce, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess, having like a disciplined approach to how you start to articulate the facades. And right now it almost feels like it was like an idea that you had, like I can imagine like your early sketches, which we saw at the very beginning, very exuberant, that became the building. And that I think there's an opportunity for you to step back and say, okay, how do I now kind of control this, rather than it as a form or as a series of kind of formal gestures controlling the project and controlling you. So I think that's where the friction in my mind starts to come up a little bit.
I would also say just very quickly that I appreciated the technical execution of the kind of exploded axonometrics, the diagrams. I think that you have a handle on the systems planning and how you communicate it. I think that maybe the resolution of the skin, the curtain wall, and these sails maybe needs a little more study.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, so we're at our last presentation. The instructor tells me that the video kind of explains the pedagogical intent of the undertaking. So we'll do that, and then those students will come up. We'll also move the camera around so you can see the beautiful model that they created. So, you ready, Matt?
Hello and welcome to our Passaic River Watershed Studio. This is part of the studio series dealing with the larger scope of the watershed. Our team includes graduate students in architecture and urban design. Here you can see an illustration of the entire watershed and the location of our 3 focus areas. Today we will present projects focused on Paterson and Newark. This work is from Fall 2019 studio, illustrating the different scales we worked through in the semester, which translated itself into a physical model. We worked in 3 phases, which are mapping the watershed, frameworks, and priority projects. The watershed is vast and diverse both geographically and spatially. Powell's map of the arid region of the United States, which he presents to the US Senate in 1890, offered a radical new vision of the American West centered on watersheds rather than on traditional political boundaries. We researched the various threats to the watershed, such as flooding, contamination, pollution, and so on. The 3 sites that we focused on are Newark, Paterson, and Ringwood, which are the older industrial cities. We began our research and initial questions, including how and where the public connects to the water, as well as what existing threats impact the overall watershed. The students came up with different methods to present, collect information, and engage with the public. These engagement stations have 2 roles: to create a temporary public space in a currently inactive space and to raise awareness of the key issues at hand. The students had the opportunity to listen to and learn from different lectures and events, including a kayak trip and boat tour on the river. The following images are from the Paterson kayak trip. And here are some images from the boat tour. And as well as some images from our first review. The students also investigated the different ways in which people connect to the river in Ringwood, Newark, and Paterson. This includes things like kayaking and lounging, exercising, and walking. One of the urban themes that we researched is storm and wastewater management. Some of the municipalities in the watershed share this system, which is serviced by the Passaic Valley Sewerage Commission. The diagram shows that the combined sewer outfalls are located in cities and municipalities that have minority as majority and are overburdened communities, as well as Newark, which has the lowest mean income. Here you can see an illustration of the entire watershed and the location of our 3 focus areas. Today we will present projects focused on Paterson and Newark. This is a future land use plan from Newark 360, which focuses on Ironbound and the North Ward. Since Ironbound has some connection to the river, our team focused on providing access to both jobs and the river through a green industrial riverfront in the North Ward. The existing riverfront is mainly composed of industrial space. Our proposal introduces green industry within open spaces as part of a larger green network. The proposed framework includes extended green streets with blue infrastructure along the main avenues. The abandoned rail line will be a new green pedestrian line that connects the new green industrial riverfront land. As shown in this existing green space plan, there is not much green space by the riverfront. Part of the proposal is to bring in new green industries that would bring new job opportunities to the public, as well as address food insecurity issues within the community. And going into the Paterson proposal, one of Paterson's main resources is the Passaic River, which encircles the city. If you look at the launches around the Passaic River, all but 3 are in different municipalities. There are many barriers blocking residents from the Passaic River. This includes natural and human-made barriers. While most of Paterson residents have not engaged with the river has engaged with them through flooding. The city of Paterson is extremely vulnerable to flooding. Our goal is to help the people of Paterson connect to the river. We would like to introduce our framework, which has the following elements: the continuous greenway, access points that connect the neighborhood nodes with the riverfront, and green streets. We propose a continuous greenway with green streets that allow pedestrians direct access to the Passaic River and Riverfront Park. Our final proposed framework includes the existing programs on the main streets that will lead to new access points along the river. This is how we have determined our priority sites. These individual frameworks include proposals from 2 priority sites susceptible to change. Riverside Towers site focuses on changes that include a segment of a continuous greenway with proposed protected nodes, green roofs, and rainwater collection systems. The goal is to connect the schools and public housing to the Passaic with pedestrian bridges going down to a lower platform as an extension to a riverside park. The East Side Commons priority site displays the existing human-made and natural-made barriers that block pedestrians from accessing the river. The proposal emphasizes the existing green spaces and creates new access points to the river through proposed retail space and pedestrian walkways with safer traffic circulation for students, residents, and visitors. Going into our engagement stations, one of the stations we looked into was a beach mobile composed of a kit of parts. Another option we looked into was a floating dock that would allow the public to interact with the river on the river. Lastly, our engagement table included a physical model that portrays the different municipalities within the watershed. All of the things that are part of the engagement station from big to small are shown in this plan. The following series of images shows the students' process of the engagement station table model. And the model is made of puzzle-like pieces that are divided by the sub-watershed boundaries. Here are some images from our initial prototypes exploring different materials and options. With our engagement station table, we made interactive informational cards, which provided various information regarding the issues and components of the overall watersheds. And this shows the evolution of the model from midterm to final, and some images from our final with our stakeholders, as well as our public presentation at the Newark Library. Our next public presentation will be Saturday the 21st in Ringwood at 11 a.m. and Saturday, the 28th at noon at the Patterson Museum. And we hope to see you all there. Thank you.
So the students are going to take the camera around for you and show you some of the models. Just remember that when they're speaking, you need to mute.
Okay.
Okay?
You can mute right now.
Can you guys hear us?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yes, they can.
They can?
Yeah.
All right, so what we did with our model is based off three components, being the base, which consists of the overall watershed, and then we have a sublayer under it, indicating the map where it locates all the streets and municipalities that make up the watershed. And then we have these puzzle-like pieces that you can connect and interact with the engagement station that are also divided into the sub-watersheds that make up the overall Passaic River watershed.
And then we have these engagement cards that have information on the back, and then people could write on them and interact with them. For example, they provide information on the watershed itself, some of the stakeholders that we worked throughout the semester, and so on. So we have some of these that we took to the events and raised awareness and engaged with people along with the model.
What was some of the feedback that you all received at the, I guess you've had two events now, right? You had one just this last Saturday, and then you had one in December. So I'm just curious to know what kind of feedback you all received. And then from that feedback, you know, what do you see as kind of your next steps?
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
I was curious to know what kind of feedback you all received at your engagement events. I see that you had one in December and you had just one recently on Saturday. And so I'd be curious to know what kind of feedback you received. Was it what you expected? And you know, what do you imagine as being kind of next steps for you all on this project moving forward?
So since this was our first public engagement with the community, one of our first initiatives were to kind of like get an understanding of our project and what a watershed is. So we kind of explained the components that make up the overall watershed. And then from that, we got feedback and we asked questions just to see like what kind of interactions or what other engagements they would like to see with the river itself. So we were able to like kind of have conversations with them and kind of get feedback and to see what can we do moving forward. So those were like our next step is, of course, was to see like how else we can kind of create that environment that we want with the river and the community.
So what, can you give me an example of what kind of questions that they had for you, like specifically?
One of the biggest things that we learned from the model itself was that the boundaries of the watershed don't align with the boundaries of the municipalities. And so that was one thing that we brought to the public's attention, and they had no idea either. And in a lot of cases, they didn't know where their water was getting sourced from. So that was something that they had questions about in terms of where does our water come from and how is it being managed. So those were some things that we had discussed.
I mean, I think what I really enjoy about this proposal is, you know, how the model and then the cards and everything, these become tools to help sort of raise the curtain, so to speak, you know, on conditions and concerns that are largely opaque, you know, to probably many of the people that you are going to speak with. And so, and I think that, so it's important work that you all are doing. I think that's, so I think, you know, one of the things that I have found, you know, when I lead similar kind of community engagement events, you know, we go out to the community, we've got a model, we've got cards, we've got things we want to talk to them about, and we're trying to gather information. And one of the questions that always comes up is, you know, when you ask people like, so what do you need, or what questions do you have? It's not enough, right? It's just kind of like, it's not leading enough, you know, to get them to understand maybe it's because we don't really know what we're looking for either, you know? So it's like, how do you break the ice, you know, or how is it that, you know, you come to understand that something that someone says to you is not in response to a question you ask, but they're just sharing information that helps you understand, like, oh, this is a demonstrated need, this is a gap. And so I'm just curious to know, I guess that, as you all are, for, I guess, a couple questions. One is that, this is work you did last semester. Are you continuing on this semester with the work, or is that semester done now? Or how does that, like, I want to make sure my comments aren't kind of coming out of nowhere.
So the project itself is, we're finished working on it, the students, but we are going to continue to get to present the project at different engagement events. So as we saw at the end of the presentation, we have one in Ringwood and as well as Patterson.
Yeah. So I think that would be important then, because one of the things, like with these kinds of projects, particularly working with the communities, is that the issues don't neatly align with the beginning and the end of a semester. And so for those groups that you end up, interacting with, I think for them to understand that there's a kind of a continuity to the work that you're doing and that you're continuing to engage. And so while you might be done with it as a kind of a class that's finished and you've received a grade and all of that, but that that there could be kind of the trajectory could continue on with another group of students, whether it's another studio or it's a smaller group, independent study. And I'm not sure what that would look like, but that seems like that's an opportunity, in the work that you're doing.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted, such an interesting question. I think this was something that I was grappling with the studio. You saw at the beginning, there were the 4 nested scales. And so one of the things that I'm trying to do is how to build from one semester to the next to extend the timeline of these research studios. And what happened with this studio, which is kind of interesting, is that we were able to align our work with a big NSF grant that was being led by some colleagues across the street at Rutgers, Newark. And so the work that the students did was really a pilot that brought a kind of spatial component to what was mostly a data-driven research project, data-driven and historic, basically coming from an urban history perspective. So it's just a small test, but it's interesting. How do you actually make the most and connect one semester's worth of work to what's happened before? How does it lay the groundwork for another semester? And, how does it live on? And these are, I think, things that we're still really experimenting with. So I think you really got right at the heart of the project.
Yeah, but I think the other thing too is that this project speaks to is that the importance for architects to kind of be central to these conversations. It's not that everything has to revolve around us. I'm not suggesting that at all, but that we need to be at the table and being part of these kinds of conversations, because I think that there are lenses through which that we can view the work or the challenges that others may not have. And so I think, thinking about like, to me, like this project, crosses, it becomes really transdisciplinary in a way. It's like, it's across, it's through, it's between all the different disciplines. So I'm excited to see this kind of scale of project. Wow, what a difference from, the performing arts theater, to now this, which is at the scale of, watershed and infrastructure. I think it's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, I actually had a question for the students, which was about the studios, the makeup of the studio in terms of, are you all architecture students, or are some of you urban design students or infrastructure planning students, or is it a mix?
So in our last studio, it was a mix of grad students, which were taking either architecture or urban design, and then we have regular architectures that are in the B-Arch program as well. So it was a very collaborative studio with undergrads and graduate students.
Great. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, I echo so much already of what Julia said in terms of the issues that the studio is raising. I'm just thinking about maybe one of the takeaways for me when looking at the production of the studio, thinking about how I think there's a nice connection between scales. If you think about again, the design work that you're doing or the production that you're doing, that you're making tools for engagement that further a longer term project, I think that's super important. And to me, that's the model is a clear example of that, right? It's a way to engage a community around and sort of reveal these systems and concerns that have been illegible or opaque, right, or mysterious to people who live in this area. But it's about making connections, creating dialogue, and pushing the project forward, right? So, but if you think about the project from the perspective of urban design or even watershed design, I think maybe consider that that's what you're trying to do in the specific sites as well as designers, right? You're like the spaces that you're proposing, let's say the green industrial, the green streets, the access points at the water. These are elements, these are spaces, these are moments in the city that are also trying to bring together people from disparate areas to catalyze conversations, to generate new programs. That's what an urban design plan can do. And so in that sense, like the spaces that you are proposing, they're not so much like finished objects like you would think of. It's not the same exactly as resolving the concert hall that we've just been seeing, right? But it's actually the space along that waterfront is catalyzing something. It has a purpose, right? And it's a tool in that sense. And it's catalyzing community. It's catalyzing engagement, dialogue, new programs, new energy, new economies, perhaps, at that waterfront. So I think that if you carry that kind of scale shift, that kind of metaphorical linkage, perhaps, between the two, it could be a productive way of thinking about what it is you're actually doing as urban designers vis-a-vis the engagement and vis-a-vis the spatial design proposals.
So that's it. That's 4.5 hours of fairly intense scrutiny of work. So the last 20 minutes is really for you guys to kind of sum it all up. If we have any time left over, some of our faculty or even students would welcome, but we promised you a 5 o'clock hard stop. So we'd like to follow through on that. And again, this recording will be there for our accreditation team and in fact for posterity. So I give it to the two of you.
Darius, can I ask one quick question, which is trying to understand the linkage between some of the work or the studios that we saw? So to clarify, the advanced studio, which is the kind of NAB studio, does that happen in between the core and the option studios? Is that the positioning, or does it happen at the end?
Well, what you saw this afternoon is actually the pre-advanced studio. The students are now in the advanced studio. That the result of that work will be what the accrediting team looks at. What you saw from the fall is the kind of setup studio to get students sort of in the mood, if you will, for doing that advanced level work. The options fit in somewhere in between. So the options happen after third year and then typically before the advanced studio, but some students are out of sequence. So they're all happening in that fourth or fifth year undergraduate. It's much more specific and serial at the grad level.
Yeah, well, so okay, it's a little unclear still how that sequence is, but I know I taught an option studio at some point, and now I'm forgetting how those things related to each other. But nonetheless, I could just say to start off that it was really exciting to see the work. Really interesting to see the variety of options or the variety of studios that were put forward, and it'd be interesting to talk about the connections between all of them as you see them, which is why I was asking about the sequence, I guess. Everything from, obviously we think about scale from the sort of technological device or piece of furniture, right? The sort of systems of augmented reality within a building or within a space, all the way to, kind of conventional building design proposals, to the villages for the supportive housing for the formerly homeless, which are real engagement projects, right, with the with the idea of connecting to the Newark Design Collaborative all the way up to the scale of the kind of watershed urbanism studio. I mean, it's pretty exciting to see that range, and recognizing that we're not seeing the core studios this semester, we're only seeing advanced and option studios. But it's interesting, it'd be interesting to hear, I guess, from you all how, like, what are the threads that you see connecting these? And I know it's something that we're talking about here all the time because our accreditation visit is a month before yours. So we're endlessly talking about these kinds of questions. You know, even to when do you go overseas to do a design project? When do you make connections very locally in Newark or in New Jersey? And how do you kind of calibrate between those?
Well, again, there are different tracks for different kinds of students. I think we have a track of students that are coming in from community college that are thrown into kind of an off-cadence mix. And so some of those students will take the advanced studios and then do options. We haven't had overseas trips for 3 years because of the pandemic. This year, because of the buildup, we have almost 60 students going to 3 overseas programs. And they're doing that this summer so that they can either take the advanced sequence in the fall, or they're doing the advanced sequence now. So we're trying to match many different sequential models for different kinds of students at the undergraduate level. So where the options fall are sometimes before, sometimes after the advanced sequence. I would say that from a 10,000-foot view of what holds everything together, I think what you saw today was the kind of three-legged stool of what the school is. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary. We were founded in 1973 in Newark at a time of great change in the city. And so Newark has always been a focus, or urbanism, the city, the community, and the relationship of the architect to those has always been in the DNA of this place. We are a polytechnic technology, a digital technology, and where it's taking us with augmented virtual reality, those things are also very much on the minds of those here, the instructors and the students in the school. And then finally, you know, where we are in the sphere of things in the New York City area, the largest labor market for design professionals in the world, there is a professional focus of the studio. So I think what you see in the advanced studios is the ability to kind of blend that with the more sort of speculative kind of work that one typically undertakes in education. So I think you saw something of that today. We try to nest all of those things in germ form in the core, and then those march into the advanced years.
Yeah, I think that's really, I like that the sequence can be mixed up a little bit, almost buffet style, that the students can sort of chart their own path, because I think sometimes when you take such a large range of topics in terms of what in each studio, what the agency of the designer is, what the agency of the architect is, whether it's sort of building community or executing a curtain wall, that sometimes you'll see a studio where the sort of building execution, i.e. NAB studio, is at the pinnacle of a core somehow. It can communicate a value of what the sort of greatest achievement of the architect is, which can confuse students who are interested in social engagement. And so by not having that sort of super dogmatic sequence, by having a more buffet style selection, it maybe communicates that there are multiple paths that one can take through in terms of prioritizing one's efforts and one's work in a career, in a construction of a career. So I think that's pretty exciting in terms of the way all of these things might come together differently for different students.
Yeah, I think one of the things that comes to my mind as I reflect back on the range of the projects, you know, that we've seen all the way, like, you know, from the scale of a desk that can, you know, adjust to its user, to watershed, you know, issues and how we think about, you know, kind of urban infrastructures. It really starts to speak to me about, you know, the role of the architect, and maybe also the you know, the future of architecture as a pursuit that is creative, that's technical, and intellectual. I found myself thinking back to this book that I was reading, written by one of my colleagues, George Johnston. Some of you may know who George Johnston is. He's a faculty member here in the School of Architecture. He wrote a book that was published, I think it came out 3 years ago, coincided with the beginning of the pandemic, actually, called Assembling the Architect. And the book itself, it's on the history and theory of professional practice. But one of the things that he talks about in this book is he talks about how architects, like other professionals, are going to need to kind of reconceive how we educate ourselves. And that it may not be for this kind of narrowly defined profession as we may now know or may have known it. But he talks about how, as architects, in our discipline, that there'll be a series of kind of diverse roles that we're all going to have to play as practice changes. And so if I think about, I found myself kind of reflecting back on that book a couple of times, today as I was listening to the students present, and, from the scale of, asking students to pursue the kind of development and execution of a concert hall where they're thinking about issues of systems and structure and program organization, how to respond to an urban context, contextualism, all of that, to then, one other project where, you're considering how we might think about opportunities for social and community engagement, issues of equity, how architecture or design plays a role in that, acts of design and active making. And so to me, I think that, in this kind of snapshot of the projects, for these studios that we saw today, it seemed to me that it presents kind of a range of, different opportunities that students are able to engage in that prepares them for a world where they might have to, become very well versed in coding and UX, UI, and then others where they have to be able to zoom way out and think about, issues across neighborhoods and regions, and cities and kind of the impact of, water, down to the scale of a particular neighborhood. So I think that's the kind of, those are some of the things that came to my mind, and I'm really appreciating the kind of ambition that we saw across all the courses. And then also, really wanting to applaud the faculty, because knowing how hard it is to structure, all the range of the projects, whether it's looking at, the first one talking about ubiquitous spaces, with coding, but then how do you design a curriculum that engages community members who don't know how to read a plan, who don't understand when you say oh, here's a building section, they don't, and so giving students the opportunity to kind of build those kind of skills in accessible narrative, so that, because as architects, we will have to communicate with clients and with the public. And so I think that to me was some the other kind of value of the things that I saw emerge across the afternoon. While that wasn't necessarily the focus of all the conversations, that to me was sort of an undercurrent that held them all together.
These are all great comments, and I should say that, the kind of dichotomies that you're talking about are very healthy and lively debates here in the school. And there are many of us that kind of go back and forth in that. The one thing I would say that we've taken robustly with the NAV visit is kind of listening more to students. We have our new teaching and learning culture document that sort of addresses student needs. And, I'll give you one example. There's a debate as to whether or not we should be giving students sites that they can't go to. So this came up with the Prague studio. I asked a number of students that, and they said, oh, we absolutely love a site that is, somewhere where we've never been, that we can learn about that culture. So that triangulated that sort of, that kind of binary little war that we had going on here and made it more interesting. But these are great comments. There's a couple of my faculty that are still in the room, if you will, and some students. We've got a few minutes left. Anyone want to join in and make a comment? Or we can kind of, Georgine, Maria. Patricia, anybody want to make a comment? John? Well, I mean, hearing none, let me just ask you, I mean, how did this format work for you? This is a hybrid. You didn't quite see the amount of students that are in front of my hand. There's maybe a dozen left, but at one point we had 60 or 7. It actually, the din became kind of difficult for us to hear what was going on. But how was the format for you guys?
Go ahead, Julie.
I was just, I mean, I think it worked out. I mean, technology, it's great when it works, and then it's always so frustrating, whenever things happen, like, videos, freeze up or we lose audio or things like that. But I think that, all of that, I did appreciate the kind of each of the presentations being pre-recorded, the kind of 5-minute, videos. And so, because that, for one thing, it also encourages the students to be able to understand, like, how do they craft that kind of presentation. And they had to be very specific about what they said, why they said it, sequence, and all of that. So I really appreciated that. I think that for me, maybe the piece that I missed is, I'm trying to remember. So I participated in the spring 2020. Maybe I think it might have been spring 2021 super jury. That was fully remote, and I was trying to remember if at that time whether there was more dialogue between the jurors and the faculty. I may be misremembering, but that would be one thing that I would love to have. That would be one piece that I feel is missing, is like, because I feel like probably if you all were all in the room, you're having sidebar conversations with each other, and Brian and I can't hear you. We can't participate. Like maybe you have like a look on your face, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're talking about this, or, why are they going in this direction? So that was the piece that I feel like I missed out on. But I don't know, Brian, you may disagree with me.
Yeah, no, I feel the same. I think maybe I really appreciated the break structure. It's for these, long sessions in the computer. That worked out really well in terms of the timing. Standing up from the computer and such. I think the conversations with the students were really fun, and they worked really well. And I completely agree. The projects were very well presented, and the pre-recorded presentations were very successful in that regard. Maybe it's even as simple as, if you don't have time for like a sort of dedicated kind of more conversational format with other faculty and students, maybe even just another laptop plugged in giving us the camera view of the audience would help us even just sort of like mentally be in the room with all of you, perhaps. Yeah, but I think we got a good picture. We got a great picture of the studios that were presented today, and the kind of breadth of studios that you're offering, and the experience that the students are having there.
Good, thank you for that. We had hoped to have a camera person with a handheld camera kind of going around the room and interviewing. There's another big event on campus today, and we were told that was just too much to ask. So I guess we're lucky we did this really unsupported, just us kind of making it work. So I'm thrilled that it worked out. It wasn't maybe as seamless on this end, but I think the point got across. Look, there were silver lining events during the pandemic that we learned. One was recording presentations. Since we're recording them anyway, why not pre-record them? And students came up to me and said, "This is the first time I've ever gotten a good night's sleep before a review." And then they say, "Oh, I can't stand my voice on video." But so any closing comments from you guys? We've got a couple of minutes left.
I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to join you this afternoon. I really appreciated being able to have this conversation, get to meet Brian. Haven't met Brian before. And as I was saying, and I think it was in between one of the first breaks, Darius, that when we came back on, that I always find these kinds of events really useful myself because it allows me a moment to kind of step out and see what others are doing, which then allows me to kind of reconsider things that we're doing or that I'm doing and maybe spark something in my mind. So I found it really, really inspiring to be part of this conversation this afternoon. So thank you.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I really appreciated the invitation. I was honored to be able to join. Also to meet you, Julie, to know people in the audience, colleagues, former colleagues in the room, to see the work and how the school has developed, since I left in 2018. And again, because we're also going through reaccreditation right now. These questions that are being asked, and it sounds like being debated there at the school, are really important ones, as we've seen encapsulated, I think, through the studios that the students presented today. Like, again, saying everything from the scale of furniture to building to watershed. How do we, within a 5-year curriculum in some cases and shorter in other cases, navigate that kind of diversification of the field, all while there seems to be a push for more and more professionalization of the kind of traditional professional degree program? So how do we strike the balances between all of those things, which are equally important? So I think it's really been very thought-provoking to see how you all are managing that there at NJIT. And so again, thank you for the invitation. I really enjoyed the afternoon.
Thank you both. I know it's a big chunk of time to take out of your day, and I also know that being in front of a screen can be numbing. So thank you again. And the takeaways that I have from each of you is Ryan continually taking back that kind of oscillation between scales. That's what we do. I think that's what we have to do. And Julie, your use of the term generosity was really just heartwarming. Just sort of think about architecture as a generous pursuit. So thank you both. We'll see you soon, and we'll give you access to the video if you want to use it. And please, it's open source. You can play it for anyone. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.